It is 6 o'clock. The mic is sounding weird, so I think it's a good time to start. I'd like to start on time. First announcement I want to make is that the tax classification hearing will immediately follow a joint meeting that we're having with the school committee and the finance committee regarding the first pass at our FY26 budget. We did that so that the other committees could adjourn after our discussion and get to work on their own agendas. So the tax classification hearing will start at 7:15. Wanted to let people know that.
Near themselves.
So I am going to start by calling the select board to order. I see we have a full house. So the November 18th, 2024 meeting of the select board is now called to order. Eric, I'm going to turn to you to call the FinCom.
Okay, I'll call this meeting of the Concord Finance Committee to order, and we'll start with a call of the roll.
Suresh Bhatia, Peggy Briggs, Kathy Kukalo, Eric Dahlberg,
Present.
John Garofalo, Pat Geyer, Greg Garriello, Don Kupka, Lindsay Liss, Dee Ortner, Carlin Reed, present, Paul Rodriguez, Kazi Sedrusaman, Shri Tupul, Lois Wassoff. We have a quorum.
And you have a member walking in. Don Kepka, great. Okay, good. Okay, now the school committee, would you like to call yourself to order?
I'll call the Concord School Committee to order.
Yeah, you have to use the mic.
I'll
yeah.
call the Concord School Committee to order.
And I'll call the Concord-Carlisle Regional School District to order.
You had a quorum, great. Okay, first of all, I want to thank the committees for coming here on a night that's not your usual meeting night. It's really good of you to come on a Monday night off schedule. The work that we're going to be doing tonight, which is our first look at the budget, is something that we all would do on our own, so coming together to do it together hopefully will mean that we won't have a lot of redundancy. So let's try to use our time well. I'm going to turn it over to Anthony Ansaldi, our CFO, to give us an overview of the financial forecast before we move into the main event, which is the capital forecast.
Thank you, Mary. So as Mary said, this is the second of the three meetings that was agreed upon in August. And what I wanted to do is present what I presented to the Finance Committee last week is the financial forecast, the 5-year look ahead. And then with that, we're going to talk about the unvetted 10-year capital improvement plan. And when I say unvetted, this was capital request by department, and it hasn't been reviewed by myself and Kerry to determine what will be funded and what won't be funded. That will happen for the next meeting. So with that, again, tonight's agenda, we'll start with the forecast, and then we'll get into the capital improvement plan and each of the various layers, capital outlay, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So first, we're going to start with where do our revenues come from for the budget. So there's 4 different areas. The biggest one, obviously, being the property taxes, then followed by state aid, local receipts, and other financing sources. So this slide talks about the property taxes and how we determine, based on the levy, what we're going to be taxing you as residents. So it basically gets into how the levy is calculated with, you start with prior year levy limit, you increase it by 2.5% every year, added by new growth, and that gives us the levy limit. We add back in our debt exclusions. We have our base, that should say add debt exclusions onto that next column there, and then our unused levy capacity, and then what we have our as total tax levy for the start of FY26. State aid. So state aid, the top of the state aid is what we receive in section A under education.
Anthony,
Yes.
Can I just interrupt you for a minute? If you go back to property taxes, right?
Sure.
When you were talking about the levy limit, right? That is so that I just like to explain to the people who are new to this that is what keeps us, avoids an override.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So everything we're talking about is within the levy limit.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
All right, so state aid, it has 3 sections on the top of what we receive: education, followed by general government, and then the total estimated receipts. And then we have offsets to those. And those are chargebacks for various items, including the MBTA. So the net bottom line for state aid on the bottom row of that chart is, for FY25, the estimate was a little over $6 million. Local receipts. So our largest driver of local receipts is motor vehicle excise taxes. So what I did on, just go back for 1 second, on state aid, when I projected out those other years going forward to the 5 years, I based that on 2.5% increase. And that's based on historical, what we've been receiving from the state. Okay, local receipts. Again, the motor vehicle excise is our biggest driver of local receipts. What I did there is used a 4% growth rate for each of those years going forward. Our next biggest, where we've had some nice interest revenue, was because interest rates are high. But if you look, I dropped that in FY26. Why? The obvious reason: interest rates are going down. That means we're going to get less money. So we benefit when interest rates are high on the money, but now the interest rates are going down, so we have to start looking at that and reducing our estimates for that for FY26. Followed by various meals, room, jet fuel taxes. Next is our other financing sources. So those are transfers in from our CMLP, our revolving funds, the BD Center, etc. And then fees, rentals, miscellaneous revenue. Biggest one obviously being transfers in from other departments for those expenses, and then permits and licenses. So our total of other financing sources for FY25 was little less than $6.3 million. So the 5-year revenue forecast, group all those together. You have your property taxes, your state aid, your local receipts, and other financing sources, and this is the amount of money that we build a budget off of. So looking at the expense now. So 5-year expenditure, we're going to look at town government, joint accounts, schools, and capital outlay. All right, so town government, what I did here is just increased every department by 4%. Why did I do 4%? It's just a number that I arbitrarily selected based on the FinCom's guideline of 3.26. I never expected to go to 4%, but I always like to go with the most conservative worst case scenarios. So that's why all my estimates, even with revenues, is very conservative. So, well, we'd all love to have a 4% growth. It's just something that is not realistic. Joint accounts. So our biggest driver is group health, and that's where it says group insurance. So last year, we actually had a decrease in this account from FY24 to FY25, and that was because we transferred out of Minuteman Neshoba Health Group, and we went to Meyer. So we recognized the savings. Doing that, though, so we lowered our estimate to $8 million, but what we actually found when we did that, our enrollments actually increased ever so slightly. So that $8 million, we're about 150,000 approximately, where that was under budgeted. So we're over budget by $150,000 right now. So what I did is to project off the FY26 for that. That's a big jump. So our health insurer, Meyer, told us that we should look at a 10 to 12% growth on health insurance costs. So I based that on the number of 8.15, say, and then I did 12% of that. Why 12%? Again, it's the worst case scenario that they told us, so I'm always going to go with that higher number. Oops, did I just drop something? Property and liability insurance, last year we actually saw a 25% growth in this area. So this year, it's too early to get these numbers for our insurance carriers. So what we did here is based on some conversations that we had, very uncommittal by them, we went with a 10% increase for group insurance. Property and liability insurance. Unemployment, workers' comps, those went up by historical 3-4% that they normally do every year. And then if you look at the Social Security, you'll actually see next year, from this year, FY25 to FY26, we actually have a decrease, which was great for this year because I talked about that health insurance cost that was $150,000 more than what we expected. But by implementing or stopping Social Security and the town share of 6.2 for part-time employees or non-pensionable employees, we're actually going to be saving $150,000 this year. So that's good news because that offsets the health insurance increase. Our retirement assessment, those numbers come from our actuaries. So debt service is basically debt service within the levy for town and schools. We borrow $4 to $5 million, and you'll see that in the slide when we talk about the capital improvement plan. So that's what we're projecting out based on that for debt service within the levy. Now, debt service outside the levy, you're going to see that there was a jump from FY25 to FY26. The reason for that is that we borrowed the fourth tranche of money. It was about $35 million for the middle school. So we'll have one more that we'll have to borrow at the end of the project. And we gave ourselves a little wiggle room because hopefully we're still under budget there and perhaps not needing to borrow as much. So more to come on that as, next year. All right, so schools, again, what I did here is the same thing I did for the towns. I just assumed that each of the entities, Minuteman Tech, Concord Public Schools, and the region was growing at 4%. I'm sure they'd love to hear that too at 4%. They see the superintendent smiling, but again, these are conservative numbers, and I wanted to throw the worst case scenario out there. All right, so when you wrap all this together in a 5-year budget forecast, you have the revenues up on the top, and then you have your expenses. And then this next section was capital outlay. We normally fund the Tier 1 capital from within the levy. So, and you'll see in a later slide where it's normally 3% of the prior year's budget. That number is really high. It comes about a little over, I think, $4.5 million. Well, I'd love to have that, and town departments would love to have that. I just don't think that that's a realistic number, and I think it's something that we'll have to discuss with the Finance Committee and lower that down. If you see last year, we received $2.1 million for Tier 1 capital, which wasn't even at the 3%. It actually, in fact, wasn't at the 2%. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in detail when we get to the capital, so I'll leave that there right now. So right now, if we were continuing on, you know, with these assumptions, we're actually starting to eat into our unused levy capacity. Well, that might be okay for 26 and 27. As you can see in the out years, that would mean that we possibly could be looking at an override, a Prop 2.5 override. So again, some of these assumptions on the revenue side, new growth remains constant. Now, we could talk about new growth because every year we'll budget about $1 million in new growth. And FY25, if you think back to one of the earliest slides, it actually was a little over $1.2 million in new growth. We do have some project going on with the Novo 40B. They're not permitted, so I don't count revenue that we don't have. So those in the future, we would see some new growth, and that would help us greatly. Another thing that I don't take into consideration right now is MCI Concord. It's going to be a while before you see anything out of MCI Concord, and I'd be surprised if it's within the next 5 years, to be honest, but that's just from my own experience. State aid grows again at the 2.5% every year, and that's something to watch because that is something where the last time the state had a budget crisis back, I think it was 2009, and Governor Deval Patrick actually reduced local aid mid-year, and that's where the cuts were when the state needed to make some budget cuts. So what they did is they cut local aids, and then it became the community's problem to deal with that. So that's something to keep an eye on. Again, motor vehicle excise tax grows at 4%. The interest revenue decreases because of the interest rates. On the expense side, all the towns growing at 4%. Health insurance, as I mentioned, the 12% increase off FY25 after the adjustment. Property liability grows at 10% insurance. And then that, I mentioned here again, that Medicare grows at over 5%, but we're recognizing about the $175,000 in savings from not paying Social Security any longer. So we'll talk about free cash. This chart, I just wanted you to see what free cash looks like over the last number of years. And you can see back in 20, I believe the town established the middle school stabilization fund. So there's a chunk of money, a large chunk of money came from that, and I believe a piece of that came from the overlay. So, which brought our levels down to something that we're not very comfortable with. Because although Moody's, when we went out and borrowed, we had to go to the rating agencies, and Moody's reaffirmed our AAA bond rating, which is the highest rating you can get. But they did make a notation that our reserves were very low. So to put it in perspective, our general reserves is $4,000. That's extremely low, and if you went on to the Department of Revenue's website and you compared us to our neighboring communities, you'll see that we're really, really low on reserves. And yes, we do have middle school stabilization and we do have levy capacity, but still, our reserves are something that we're hoping with our free cash this year. I know that FinCom's going to be talking about a policy where, you know, I'm certainly crying from the rooftops the need for a capital stabilization fund and a debt stabilization fund, because we need to prepare for what ultimately will happen is another downturn in the economy. And we have to be in a situation where this town could be able to withstand that, yet continue to do the business that we need to do and take care of the assets that you have.
So, sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Before we move to the capital piece? So just, if we went back to the 5-year budget forecast, Anthony, which is page 17. Sorry, if I'm following it correctly, it doesn't seem like the unused levy capacity is rolling over from year to year in terms of the negative. So there's an unused net levy capacity of 3.6 million. We're projecting a negative, a 900,000 in loss in 2025, which would bring that down to 2.68, right? If I then roll that 2.68 into the next year, because that's my new unused levy capacity, or does it, why does it not?
But there's other factors that go into
Roll
that.
over.
You're going to have some new growth. You're going to have other contributing factors which will grow with the excess levy capacity as
Okay,
well.
so it's going to grow back up
Yeah.
Then-
ever so slightly, yeah.
and then come back down?
Right.
Is that
That's-
the, okay.
Yeah, that's what our projections
All
are
right,
looking like
I
right
just
now.
wanted to make sure I was following that correctly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's good. Actually, Anthony, before you go on to the capital, let's stop here and see if there are any questions from anybody on the committee. Does anybody on the school committee have any questions about what Anthony's presented so far? Yeah. Good yelling.
The bonding for the middle school, is it completely, or that, I wasn't clear. Is that all the debt? No.
No,
Okay.
there's one last debt that we'll do to reconcile the project.
And
We
that's
need to
what
borrow.
percentage of the total project?
It's very small. I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, but
Okay.
it's,
20?
no.
So we bonded 90%?
We probably, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But the debt service won't hit this year. It's going to hit in FY '26 for the last tranche.
Correct.
Any other questions?
Mary, I have one. And actually, it's for Anthony. So 2 questions. One was, with a large increase in health insurance, it's fair to assume that OPEB should be higher too, correct? So
Yeah.
it's flat here, but we probably need to
Yeah,
tweak
we're
that.
actually going to be meeting with our actuary and take another look at that.
Okay. All right. And then the other question I had is, I know our pension reserve is almost funded. Is it now 2030 that it's fully funded?
32, Kerry,
Is
right?
it-
32? Yeah, 32.
All right.
Right
okay,
now.
So it's now. Okay. All right. Thanks.
I have a quick follow-up question. So when that middle school debt hits, where is it showing up in the '26 forecast?
Excluded debt.
Okay, well,
me go
I'm
back
looking
to-
at expenses, total town, total joint,
Look
total
at
schools.
joint accounts. Look at, there
See
you go,
right over
bottom
here? I
line.
don't know if I can, well, I can't read my arrow.
Joint, it's in the
Line
joint
82.
accounts. Ah,
Right.
okay. I see it. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mark, do you have a question? No. I have a question, Anthony. So I think this is a good outline, and you've got some really broad assumptions here, but you're going to have to clean it up and get closer numbers,
It's a
right?
working document,
Obviously,
yes.
okay. When you talked about the free cash, what's our free cash percentage right now? I know our policy is somewhere between,
I don't have the percentage, we're probably, let's see, we were at 8, 9, getting close to 8, 9%,
and
just
you,
by rough math off the top of my head.
okay, so you talked a little bit about how you feel like we're in a weak position with reserves. Can you say a little bit more about that and where you would fund, how you would fund a capital stabilization fund?
So a good free cash policy will have a baseline of, say, like 3 to 5%, and it's actually in that, it's in the text right up there, that normally if you're having about 3 to 5%, so if we always wanted to have a goal of keeping 5%, now anything we had above that, we could talk about allocating some of those funds into various buckets. You know, one of them being a capital stabilization, one of them being a debt stabilization. Maybe there's something else that is a pressing need or the future. You know, I think one thing that you'll see when we start talking about the capital is that you have a lot of capital requests that are coming, and we need to plan for those, because if we continue on the pace that we're doing right now, we're not going to keep up with the same thing that we've kind of struggled with right now, where our roads haven't kept up with where they need to be, so on our facilities and everything else that goes with that.
Okay.
So can you just, what's the free cash percentage? We usually have a policy that we wanted to keep it above 5%, but
Right.
not above 10%. And when we hit that
That's
10%, it's usually when we start creating those stabilization funds.
Right, we're getting there, so that's probably,
Okay.
I don't know, it's rough math off the top of my head, looks like 8 to 9%, somewhere around there, and then once free cash gets certified this year, expect it to be a little bit higher, so we'll definitely be at that point where we should be talking about putting some of that money into stabilizations.
Okay, so it's healthy, not from
healthy.
it's not weak
We're
necessarily. But if we
in
want
the
to put
right
reserves.
direction, now we gotta
Yep.
build up some of those reserves and plan for that rainy day.
Great, great.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I mean, we were down to 4 or 5%, and that was worrisome, but 8 or 9% is much better. And that would be great to start building up those stabilization funds.
Yeah, Terry, good point. It is much better, and especially, you know, it makes us sweat a little bit less when we're on the
Yeah.
bond rating calls, and we can say that we're going in the right direction.
Eric, do you want to open it up to any questions from FinCom?
Any FinCom questions? Peggy?
Tony, I'm curious, I'm sure, this is a complicated number and you probably don't have it, but I'm looking at, mine doesn't have the pages in it, but the one that shows the projected unused levy limit going negative in 2028. And I am curious, what percent growth, you used 4%?
For town departments.
What's the break-even growth so that we don't go negative?
Good question.
I mean, that's what we need to strive, that would be you know, a number we could strive for. That lower percentage, I don't know, it's 3.6, 3.8, I don't think, it's not gonna be that big a difference.
Right,
But
yeah.
if you could figure that out, it would be great.
Yeah, that was, we briefly talked about that at the last Finance Committee meeting, and I know Dawn brought that up, and we were trying to look at backing into if we wanted to maintain a 3%. I think it used to be 4%. I think we're down to about 3% of unused levy capacity. So what would that look like if we tried to remain constant at the 3 or 4%? So that's some more analyzing of the data that we have to go through that exercise.
Yeah, let's solve for that number. And then on the 5%, I should know the answer, of its annual budget, is that, this is a free cash slide.
Yep.
5% of its annual budget, is that the town and CPS?
According
is
to
it
your
just the
policy, I believe it's the
town?
town, the whole budget.
Including the high school?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Anyone else on Finance Committee have questions for Anthony?
Questions, Alexa?
I have one, just clarification. You referenced the guideline, Anthony, 3.26%. I just want to clarify, that was last year's
Yes,
guideline.
that's what I was
This year's
talking about,
guideline, we
yeah.
haven't said it yet.
No, right,
Yeah,
right,
that's a good point.
yeah.
Well, I think that goes to Peggy's question, you know, what would the break even be? And that'll help you figure out the guideline.
We got a question. Go ahead.
My question is, I noticed that you've estimated 4% growth for both the town side and the school side. So we, as a committee, talk quite a bit about what our main drivers are that drive our increases. And oftentimes, the main things that drive our increases are tied to regulatory aspects of education, namely special education and things that we are sort of services that we are mandated to require for our students. What I'm curious about are what are some of the main drivers for the town, given, you know, that you've applied the same level of increase to both budgeting entities, and I know that because we talk about if we had to cut, where could we cut? Because there are a lot of places where we can't cut. I guess two questions. What are the main drivers for the town that is driving that level of increase? And secondly, do you guys have the same types of pressures that we do, where there are certain things that we legally just can't cut and go? And do you guys have sort of those same restraints on your budget?
Yeah, I'm sure Carrie can expand on this, but, you know, our biggest driver is a personnel cost, right? That's where we spend most of the money, and the CBAs factor into that. But, you know, we build our budgets on level services. We don't look to increase, you know, and if anything, I think the budget message is going to be this year is to find ways to become more efficient and therefore being able to save money in the future, because that's what we need to focus on, because we still the community expects a level of service, and I think the service that we provide is excellent. I think the school department's excellent, and, you know, we have to find a way to be, as departments, to become more efficient, and realizing that we're up against that cap eventually, and that we need to make sure that we're doing everything possible to reduce that cost. Before we came to the community, before we came to the town and asked for a Proposition 2.5 override. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Gary, if there's anything else.
I think I would just say that the 4% is a placeholder for modeling, as Anthony mentioned. So on the town side, we have mandated services that we have to provide. We have to provide police, fire. We have to provide an opportunity for people to develop their property and be able to provide a process for that and regulations. So for us, it's more service levels. It's not that we can and can't. It's, you know, how long are you going to have to wait to have an application processed, or how long are you going to wait for an ambulance, that type of thing. So it's maybe quite a bit more subjective than it is on the school side.
Great, let's move on to capital.
Great. All right, so this slide is the 10-year capital improvement plan. Now, it looks like a lot of money, because it is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But on the town side, we had 194 requests, and that's across all entities, all funds. General fund, CMLP, BD Center. So, and you'll see in another slide the breakdown. And on the school side, there was 54 capital requests for a total of $28 million over 10 years. So when we look at this 10-year capital request by fund, so this chart just goes to show you that the blue is the general fund. So that would be the town and the schools request. And then the water is orange, the sewer is purple, CMLP is yellow, and that little sliver that you can barely see is Beatty. So the town capital request summary. So when we gathered all the requests and put them in this chart over a 10-year period, this is the breakdown of the requests by government unit segments. What I mean by that is general government, finance, et cetera. It's not necessarily by departments, but it's departments within those groups. So as you can see for FY26, the total request was $14 million, 14 plus on the town side. And then it just goes up. So this chart just lays out the 10-year capital plan, which is exactly what the capital committee from a couple of years ago, Terry, right? That's exactly what they wanted to see, is what we did. On the non-general fund side, this is a breakdown of 10 years of all the requests that were made. We still have some work to do with BD and projecting out some other years, but we have time to do that. But again, their request for FY26 was a little over $14 million. So Tier 1 capital, this is the breakdown of what I was talking about earlier as far as the 3%. So if the total budget is, prior year was 132, 141, 3% would, I'm sorry, let's go to 26. The budget was 138, 108, 501. The 3% of that would be $4 million. That's what I mentioned originally, where I didn't feel comfortable that we could afford $4 million. So that's why I was looking at an alternate way to bring that number down. And on the 2% side, that would be $2.7 million. So, and again, if you look at 2025, the 3% was actually a little less than $4 million. 2% was a little over $2.6 million, but what we got funding for was 2.18. So we were grateful because that was an increase over the past few years, because we're still coming out of the COVID years where town didn't have the extra funds to do that capital, so it was a push, hold back on capital requests, but all that did is kick a can down the road, right? Because the capital items still need to be addressed. We just couldn't address them. So we were grateful to get that number higher. We'll even be a little bit more grateful if we can get it close to, I think the 2% would be great. But we still have to do some analysis there on that to determine what, in fact, we can fund.
So Anthony, I just want to stop for a minute, and again, so this Tier 1 capital is capital that would be funded out of our property taxes with cash,
Correct.
right? And you're projecting the $2.7 to $4 million based on the total budget, which assumed probably a higher than realistic growth in expenses.
What's the prior year budget?
Plus 4%. Okay, so these numbers are a little bit high.
A little bit higher,
Okay.
yeah. And
Okay.
yeah, and even with the 4% again. it's just-
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I have a further question about that. Do you have a sense of what the asset base is that's being maintained with this? So those of us that own a home might think in terms of, you have to do capital projects in your home that are something like, 1, 2, 3% of the assumed replacement value of that home. So what's the replacement value that's being serviced by this 2% or 3% allocation from the operating budget?
Yeah, good question. I don't have that number, Mark, off the top of my head of our total assets. I just don't have that number right now.
Does the town have a balance sheet?
Yes.
Okay, so it's on there. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, because to some extent, this is, to me, reads like taking a look at your income and deciding and of course, people do that too. They take a look at their income and decide how many projects they can afford to do, which is one way to do it. But it might be interesting to weigh that against what is that asset base, and also observe how that asset base is going to change. In February, we're going to bring a $100 million asset online and add to that then needs to be maintained going forward, even as we also surplus another asset which is not worth nearly that much.
Yeah, well, I think the schools went through an excellent, they'll speak to it, I'm sure, they went through an excellent process of a facility study where they've making sure that they account and plan for their school buildings and what needs to be done so we can keep up with those assets.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Tier 2, so our policy, roughly I broke this down into, we normally will borrow between $4 and $5 million for Tier 2 debt within the levy for projects. And then Tier 3 capital is, everybody knows, Tier 3 is something that would need to be funded from a debt exclusion. That means it needs to go to two places. It needs to go to town meeting to vote for it, to raise the taxes above the levy limit, and then it has to go to the ballot box to also receive an affirmative vote for that to happen. But what we wanted to point out here is, you heard last year us talking about a road project. And what this right now is includes a 5-year, a little over $25 million to bring our roads up to a more satisfactory pavement management index grade, which I don't know the number right now. It's below 70, span around 70, even below. Yeah, so we're in the 60s. So anybody that drives through some of our roads, although they've done a great job in the center, there's some roads that still need work on. But with the level of funding that we have in our debt policies, we're just unable to keep up and unable to improve on that index. So this is something that was discussed at the Finance Committee. The Select Board talked about this last year, and it was something that, we were told, let's see what this would look like. So what you have here is you have that, the $25 million spread out over 5 years. And then also what we put on, if you remember back in the summer, the Select Board and the Finance Committee took tours of the public works and public safety facilities, and you got to experience what our staff has been experiencing, that those buildings really have outlived its useful life, and we need to start looking at that. So what we did is, just for a placeholder, we put the building projects on there for FY28 with the design happening in FY27. Again, that's just a placeholder, because the first thing we need to do to even consider building is have land, and that hasn't been solved yet. I know we're working on it, but we don't have that. But we wanted to put that as a placeholder because that's something that needs to be addressed at those two facilities.
So these are construction costs only?
Those are construction cost estimates, and they're based on the last estimates that we received at around $1,000 a square foot for new construction, and what the estimate square footage would be with for those two buildings.
Thanks.
But it looks like the design costs might be in '27, FY '27.
That just was a placeholder.
Yeah,
So if we were going to do the buildings in '28, we have to account
Yep.
for the design costs in '27.
Yep.
And actually, Terry, the designs, they take over a year on when you're
Right.
designing a building. So the dates, don't get too hung up on the dates.
Yeah, yeah.
We just wanted to put them out there.
So this might be a good time, just because I don't see it in here, to remind people of what the project size is of Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 projects. In other words, what kind of spending are we talking about in each category?
You want to have this slide right here?
Great.
So here's this slide, demonstrates exactly what Mark just said. For all the departments, and this is just, it looks like it doesn't include the schools, this particular slide, but on the town side, this is the capital outlay, the Tier 1. So if you add those two together, it's what, just shy of $4.5 million, which was a surprise when I first put this together, because, when you first see the large number of 376 million, you never know how that is going to play out and what the asks were. But as we break these down by category, by funding category, well, we can't afford $4 million. It's not as bad as it could have been. So that's, we'd obviously, if we got $2.5 million for capital, that means there's $1.5 million that has to be cut. That wouldn't be able to be funded. So, but that breaks down the category just for FY26. So as you can see, Tier 2 is a little over $6.5 million. Tier 3 is the $5 million. That would be the first leg of the 5-year road project. And then other funding sources, there's grants. We've identified some areas where we could actually look at grant funding for some of these capital requests, and the fire chief has identified a grant, so that's great. That's some savings there. Revolving fund, another thing is the ambulance. He has an ambulance request, but that would be paid for out of the revolving fund, the ambulance revolving fund, the retained earnings there. So even though we don't have an ALS, so we're expecting a larger chunk of revenue, ambulances, when you, if you want an ambulance, it's about 1.5 years to almost 2 years out. So the reason why we have that on here now is we would put it as a borrowing article just so we can place the order, because you have to have a funding source in order to place an order. And then by the time the ambulance come in, we'd look to pay for it from cash from the excess receipts in the ambulance fund. And then the cemetery has some cemetery perpetual care money that we would take a look at for some of that request there.
So as it stands now, in FY '26, our Tier 1 is coming in at 4.3, when we think it should be somewhere between 2.7 and 4 million. Is that accurate? And our Tier 2 is coming in at 6.5, when it should be somewhere between 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Is that
Yep,
right?
that's
Okay.
pretty accurate. And again, that's, that's
Okay,
those
so
few
we've-
years during COVID, set us back, so that's
No,
what happens.
That's okay, we just
Yeah.
have work to do.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, great.
Anthony, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm just curious, I've only been involved in the school's process for coming up with capital projects. I'm just curious if you can share the process the town went through to collect the 194 requests. Is it just what people are requesting, what they need? I'm just curious how you all did that.
Yeah, so at the end of the presentation, we're using a new software this year for budgeting, which will produce our budget book, and it's very much transparent. So at the end, I'm going to show you exactly what town departments had to go through in their request, and it was quite extensive this year as in past prior years. So when I'll show you one of the items on the fire department, Chief Judge does a great job in really showing the community why we need it, how we use it, what our replacement and how we're going to replace it, what our policy is to replace and refurbish fire trucks and ambulances and things like bunker gear. Bunker gear is those coats and pants that you see firefighters wear. Well, we have a 10-year. Those are only good for 10 years. So that's in there. So we made them really do a lot of extra work in saying, all right, well, before, where you just say $50,000, no, it wasn't like that this year. It was actually justify pretty much to the penny what you needed, and then also attach a quote on where you're coming up with that number. So this year, and I can't speak to prior years, but they've gone through, town departments went through a lot of work, and you're going to be able to see, and the community's going to be able to see, because ultimately you're going to be able to go onto ClearGov, and you're going to be able to drill down, and you're going to be able to see everything, all the work that they put into it, and it was, like I said, it was quite extensive. And this wasn't wish, this was actually needs. This was just to maintain again, what Kerry said, the current level of services that we're providing.
Does that answer your question, Carrie?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So is there an accompanying document that sort of outlines where those projects are? I didn't see it in the packet for tonight, and I don't know if you guys have discussed those requests yet. But so the 150,000 for X, do you guys get very specific about what exactly that is? And
Yeah.
is that document available yet for the public?
It's not a bit,
Do you want to just go through that now?
but there's only a couple more slides, then we'll go through it. But, so Alexa, to answer your question, this is unvetted. So Kerry and I are planning to sit down for the first time on Monday to start looking at this. So, we have 1 o'clock until whenever at night to really start hammering this home and really vetting the project. So at that point, when December 16th rolls around, then we'll actually have a capital budget document that will be ready to be out there. I could put all the requests out there right now, but it's unvetted and it has a lot more questions. But I'll show you what it looks like. It's going to be really nice.
Cool. Thanks.
All right, so this is just the,
Wait, Anthony.
Anthony,
sorry.
before you move on to the schools,
Sure.
on tier 3, on the big ones, is there any reason why the public safety and public works buildings are put together in the same year, FY '28?
It was just a placeholder.
Okay. And those both assume entirely new buildings. Those aren't renovations to the existing buildings.
It's complete new, right.
Okay. And the public works, I note it says public works building and campus. Is there any significance to that? Does that
So it's
assume
the
moving it?
administrative offices, then you remember the garages that we toured, so that's what I consider the rest of the campus. And then you need a yard for waste and all of the supplies that they have and so forth. So, yeah, includes all that.
So, sorry, I'm going to ask, again, I might be a stupid question, so, but the budget that we have at the beginning has the debt service projected, but that debt service isn't covering all this, right?
No, it's covering $4 to $5 million within the levy of Tier 2. So as you can see, the Tier 2 asked for 6.5, and as Mary said, we'd have to.
Yeah, but
bring
I'm just
that
saying, when
down.
we go out 5 years, so the debt service on the 5-year budget going out every year is like, in the joint accounts is like $10, $11 million.
It doesn't include tier 3.
So it doesn't include anything,
No.
any of this, right?
No Tier 2.
So that's all, I'm just like, that's all added on if we do it,
That's
right?
right, that's added
Which
on.
has to be paid for somehow.
Somehow, that's right.
Right, you're pretty good, but I don't know if somehow it's gotta get,
Yeah.
it's gotta get paid for, right? So, because I'm just like, you look at 2.5%, right? And you say, okay, here's a budget, and it just says, people, oh, it's 2.5%, right? Well, that's the Prop 2.5. But it shows we're running a deficit every year, and who's gonna pay for that? Well, that's more taxes. And then you say, well, yeah, but now I have capital on top of that I really want. Well, who's gonna pay for that? Well, that's more taxes, right? Yep. So you're starting to see it layer on top of itself, right? I mean,
if we were gonna fund above our what our policy states, so if we were funding like on Tier 2, if we were gonna fund above the $4 to $5 million, yes, would be adding more debt service within the levy. And if these buildings came on, yes, it would be a debt exclusion that would add additional debt on above and beyond what you're paying in taxes currently.
thanks.
I think the other thing, Anthony, though, is that sometimes when we bring tier 3 on, it's because the debt service for existing projects is going down. So there's some headroom there. So it's not like it's all just layering on top, right? Some projects that we already have funded, the debt
Right, but
service
that's
is
what
going down.
but the debt, yeah, but that's in the projections, right?
Yeah, but,
Well, not the tier 3.
Yeah, to add what Mary's saying, it's even, yes, debt service, even excluded debt will go down somewhat in the out years because some of that projects are rolling off. And I think that's why the town established the Middle School Stabilization Fund, is to kind of help with the next 3 to 4 years and soften that blow as more debt becomes retired. That's why, to go back to a debt stabilization, if we're starting to tuck money away now, we should be able to do something to offset what ultimately will be an additional cost, additional raise in taxes, about 2.5, with the debt exclusion, to soften the blow on that. That's why it's plan, because these are not going away, these projects, but we have to, if we start putting money aside and creating the necessary stabilization funds, we can ultimately lessen the impact to the taxpayers.
Right, and also, this FY '28 is, I believe, the first year when the Alcott and Thoreau school debt will be coming off, so we'll start to have a little bit of room there. Otherwise, we may have started the public safety and public works earlier, but there was absolutely no room. That's the very first time that we're going to have any room.
So that was way back on the 8th page of the packet. You can see the projected property tax use left debt exclusion. In FY '25, it's 10.1 million, and by FY '30, it's 9.4 4, call it, and that's because the excluded debt projects are beginning to roll off. It's probably important right here to remember that when we did things like Alcott, Thoreau, Willard, we used something called level principal debt funding, which meant that if we borrowed $20 million, that we paid back $1 million in principal each year, and we paid out of the excluded debt the interest on the remainder. When we did the middle school, we did something different. We set the payments for the middle school so that they are essentially flat for 30 years. So we're not going to have, if we continue to do what we did for the middle school, we're not going to see that gradual erosion of, cheaper inflated future dollars that are also going down because we've inserted a 30-year block which doesn't go away until year 30. So we need to be, but we also should be really well aware of the fact that those are votes that we take. We take them at town meeting, we take them at the polls, and we decide to do that as a community when we're dealing with the excluded debt, which is what makes it different from the Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects, which are more funded out of the operations and tend to be smaller things. I mean, it's 194 is a lot of projects, $377 million is a lot of money, but that's less than $2 million per project. So we sometimes think, $1 million or $2 million project isn't that much, but given enough time, given enough of them, they do absolutely add up.
So, Anthony, I just have one more question. All these discussions around debt schedules and declining debt, we really ought to put together some kind of plan for what's our, like a debt capacity schedule.
Yes.
To sort of understand that. And, I know we've got a lot of authorized debt that's unused. All of that, I'm sure, is in some of the capital projects, but something to be thinking about and something that I think we'd all benefit from if we can put something like that together.
Yeah, that was certainly on my radar, Wendy, is to look at capital projects that were already funded in prior town meetings and whether we have an opportunity maybe to rescind some of those and repurpose some of that capital money, and also rescind some of those authorizations for debt if we're not going to use them. So that it's certainly on the radar. It's with the staff down right now, it's still on the radar, but that's something that we're going to go through. And then with the Tier 3, with the road projects, that we'd be talking about what that debt would look like and everything that you just said. So
Yeah, one of the recommendations of the Capital Planning Task Force was to put together a schedule that smoothed debt, that timed projects, so that we didn't see these big bumps, that we smoothed the impact to the taxpayer.
So Mary, since you said that, my big question is that we're not adhering to many of the edicts or the recommendations of the Capital Planning Task Force, namely this meeting tonight, which wasn't properly advertised as a capital planning joint meeting just between the school committee and the select board. With that said, can the chairs of both the Concord School Committee and you commit to following the recommendations, and when would the next meeting be?
We are meeting on December 16th.
Okay, will this plan be updated by both the schools and the town?
What plan? I'm sorry.
The capital plan. So that's what I'm saying. This is too tight, in my opinion. I think what we're trying to do, Cynthia, is we're trying to do the best we can this year with getting us together, talking together, which is a big step in the right direction. Right.
We're having, this is our second meeting, and we're scheduled for a third in December 16th.
This is the first meeting, actually.
Well, we had a joint meeting before, but it wasn't on capital, to your point.
So that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
So I'm just going to make a recommendation since everybody is so busy this year.
Yeah.
With the middle school.
Yep.
With
250, MCI.
Then maybe we should just put this on the shelf and return to it after town meeting. And I'm not saying that like we don't care about long-term capital planning, but this is not a complete capital plan in my opinion. And the school committee should come back and talk about it some more, but we don't have that. We're not meeting again until January.
The school committee?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's much more important to focus on FY. Well, we're not going to meet again until January. Yeah. No, but after that.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said we were going to not meet again until January. Okay. Okay, but I think we need to collaborate with the select board as well.
Please.
Okay.
Can I just clarify that we had a meeting on August 19th, it was capital, it was
Oh, that's right,
advertised,
you're
it was
right.
capital,
It
where,
was capital.
where
It was capital.
a committee, a working group of myself,
Okay,
Kerry,
I'll send
the
the recommendations around.
superintendent, and Bob Conry discussed what we thought was a proposal to present to the tri-boards, and we're actually carrying out step 2 of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't really what the capital planning committee recommended.
Yeah.
It recommended exactly what Wendy was asking for, in fact. They-
Capacity.
What? A schedule?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was one of the recommendations, yeah, it was.
Well, we haven't gone there yet.
I understand that, but yeah, okay. Okay, I'll send
Okay.
out the recommendations.
So if I could just say one thing, and Anthony basically said this already. We agreed to do something different for this year in recognition of everything.
Yep.
So we are following the different agreement that we made for this year.
Right, and I think that on the 16th of December, we will have a plan, and hopefully all 3 committees can agree or tweak it or whatever we're going to do with that plan. And in my mind, that's following a pretty good process.
It's just that we're supposed to very openly invite public comments, and I don't see that component.
So I think that probably should be done, you're right, in the December meeting. Because right now, we only have placeholders. So maybe when we have a real plan in December, it would be good to get the public comment.
And I believe the Finance Committee is planning on having a capital public hearing, right, Eric, in January at some point?
Yeah.
Did we push that out too?
Yes.
So there'll be probably a 4th opportunity where we're talking about capital that people can weigh in.
Yeah, I think we're aligned from what the 3 time frames that we're talking about. So just to be clear, I think from a school committee perspective, we are clear on the timeline that we agreed to. I think if you're, okay, well then we should talk offline, because we had agreed, like you said, in the summer meeting, we were going to meet in November and again in December. We have our meetings lined up with it, so if the question is around public comment, then let's talk about that and get prepared for that. Because I'm not privy to the Concord Capital meeting. Yeah, that's different, so I think we should keep it separate.
Okay, we ready to go?
Can
Eric, do you-
we do have at least one more Finance Committee
Go
question,
ahead.
Peggy?
Yep, Peggy.
It's not really a question, it's a request, and it's exactly what you've all been saying. In years past, we've been presented with what I call the pile-on diagram, and that's all we're missing here. Whether it's a bar chart or just that, I mean, I love that, pile-on diagram, and I think it will, if we can have that to look at prior to our next meeting, it will answer a lot of these questions.
Good idea. Great. Okay,
Can I
so,
ask one more question?
go ahead.
This is going back to the stabilization fund. So I understand that we have a stabilization fund for the middle school, and we haven't, I don't think, used any of it yet. Is that right?
Correct.
How much do we have in there? And is the Finance Committee considering using some of it for 26 when this next piece of borrowing hits?
So Terry, it's around $5 million. I don't have the exact
Yep,
number.
it's close to
Five,
And
yep.
yes, I think the plan was in place, and I can't speak to the plan where I wasn't here, but as I mentioned, it's really to soften the blow, I think, over the next
Right.
3 to 4 years. Yeah, that
Great.
we'll be having a warrant article to transfer some of that to offset the cost of that.
Thank
Great.
you.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the schools?
So the next chart is the schools. I'll turn it over to the superintendent and Bob Conry to give a high level of what they did.
Great. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you. So just a step back for purposes of describing the process that we used, because I think we want to hear the differences about what we brought forward and where we are. And then I understood that the charge was for Carrie, Anthony, Bob, and I to reconcile what you're seeing tonight before December 16th. So We did vet our master list. We've had both a facility study done across the 3 elementary schools in Ripley that we received a report on last spring. We have vetted that list. The $28 million was the number you saw earlier in the slides. That is not the number in the 10 years that we brought you. If you add it up, it's more like 14 or 15. A good handful of it being only we're going to do it if there's an energy management third party involved, where the town is very likely not outlaying money, but the savings are going to pay for the project. For example, a massive light project where we replace with more sustainable fixtures in the schools would, through a third party, maybe not necessarily be anything we had to put any money out for. We would just reap the savings to pay for it. So that's a different discussion in terms of what we would do there, but that's a portion of what's in the FY26 budget that we brought forward for capital. I think one can that we just need to name that we have purposely avoided here is Ripley. The study made it very clear it's beyond its useful life in almost every aspect possible. And we did not bring all those forward into this 10-year projection. I don't know what to do with that exactly, other than to say it didn't feel comfortable asking, given one, the age of the building and how hard it is to renovate a building of that age, and two, the middle school coming online. So just worth noting that. I think, too, we want to just briefly touch on the regional projects that are on the radar. We sent a memo in the packet that outlines what the school committee's been talking about. And we don't want that to get lost in the shuffle. I think last budget cycle it did. And it was at the late hour that the amenities building came up, and we want to be sure you hear an update about where we are in that discussion. So from there, I'm going to turn over to Bob and let him just give you a very high level of what's in the CPS plan, and we can briefly give you a status on the amenities building and any other high school project.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. So I'll start, since we were just talking about the amenities building there. We are presenting a study from consultants tomorrow night at our school committee meeting. They're presenting four or five options and alternatives for us to consider for funding an amenities building. So if people are interested, they can tune in there, and we'll make the document accessible to town boards of both towns. Yeah, and I won't talk any more about that to take away from, since we haven't presented to school committee yet. On the CPS capital, again, we did use a third-party firm to look at all 4 CPS buildings. We didn't look at either Sanborn or Peabody. Obviously, it didn't make sense to look at either of those since they're being taken out of service. When we looked at, we had the consultants prioritize projects into different levels of priority categorization. And we've essentially, for the most part, followed their recommendations in terms of bucketing things by years. In addition, we recently participated in a meeting held with the sustainability director and others in the town on a performance management contract and talking about the possibility of it. So within our plan, anything that you see highlighted in green is potentially funded by a performance management contract, and those are the types of things we probably won't prioritize if we can't get them funded in that manner. There are some in there that are smaller that we might have to do, regardless if we have another funding source or not. We also highlighted some items in brown that potentially could be funded by MSBA, roofing related. We'd have to check and see whether we qualify for their criteria. There's a lot of districts with older buildings than we have in our elementary schools, so we'll see whether we're eligible or not through their accelerated repair program. But then again, so we've summarized it here with year 1 through 5, 26 through 30. And if we exclude the energy management items, we come in at $908,000 in FY26. And then we start to see a bump up. It's fairly level through 28, and then a bump up in 29 and 30 where we have some larger projects. So that's kind of the high-level overview of our process. We will do some more looking at it too, and then meet with town manager and CFO Anthony and Carrie, and kind of look to put our numbers together and see where we stand.
So I think our goal, and we've actually come in fairly low on capital the last few years, is to not deter things for so long that we end up having major repairs to do. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Like I said, Ripley somewhat being an exception. I think just in terms of the regional piece, the building's 10 years old this coming spring, and we're going to need to step back from the high school and do the same type of facility study, and that is a set of preventative, proactive work that is not included here at this point. I think my target for that is probably at its 11 or 12 year anniversary, so we're going to slow down that, but not do it yet, but we're going to have to do it. In terms of other projects at the high school that I just don't want anyone to not know what's happening, the school committee has agreed to privately raise for a track down at the Walden Street entrance, so we are not expecting an ask to this group on that. The turf on Memorial Field is going to hit its end of life in the next handful of years, so that's going to have to be a discussion. And I think otherwise, if the amenities building gets done, we're at the point where 10 years later we can say the campus is complete, and we're really in a preventative, proactive phase. So that's not reflected here at this point as we bring this to you at its first pass.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got two comments and a question. My comment is, first of all, I'm delighted to see that you're doing energy improvement investments, especially if we can get a performance management company to fund it up front. I think that's great. I hope that works out really well. The other thing I wanted to mention is you said that Ripley wasn't in your plan. And you know that the town is, because the town right now is in the middle of looking at so many different areas that are coming available, we're trying to get our arms around what are we going to do with all of these different pieces of land that are coming available, and what are our needs. And I would really ask to put Ripley in that conversation. Okay?
Probably a smart idea.
I think so.
You have 5 preschool classrooms in the central office that something's going to have to be done at some point.
So that's an effort that we're going to undertake in about a month or so, and we'd really like to
Great.
get the school committee involved in that. But my question is, when I looked at the amenities building, I saw that some of the proposals had concession and some didn't have concession. So I guess, can you tell me more about concession, and is that a moneymaker?
It might fundraise for some of the booster groups, et cetera. It's a very small space that's in a couple of those buildings in the designs or schematics, really. It's walls and plugs for microwaves and things like that. It's nothing elaborate. The committee's going to start talking about that tomorrow night as to whether or not that's something they want to include. It was part of the option set we gave the vendor to look at.
Okay, so it wouldn't, I was hoping it was going to be a big revenue generator.
No, I'm sorry, it's not, Mary. I think my last comment is to just note that the buses, our school buses, are still going to be in the operating budget. And just so everybody's on the same page, we talked about that quickly when we met, and it was too many variables. It felt like it was going to be hard to compare, so we left the school buses in the operating budget.
But other vehicles are now included here, so the buses are the last thing left that's not.
Right.
Question?
Mary, just one more clarifying. I think just the last piece on the amenities building, like we said, we're going to deliberate more with more of a conversation open to the public tomorrow and go through the details. But I just want to make sure that everyone in this room understands the feedback that was heard. I know a lot of effort went in with my predecessors, but we have reached out for grants to offset the cost. We have looked into multiple options, so as Dr. Hunter said, we're going to be looking at 4 or 5 different schematics to see those options. So while there are concessions in some of them that might be preferred, may not be, we don't know yet, we're going to be looking at a whole swath of information so that we've fully vetted everything based on the feedback we got last year. Yeah.
And I will just add one thing about the concessions square footage. I don't know cost per square footage wise what that adds to the cost of the building. As Lori mentioned, it's, you know, walls and some plugs. So I don't think the cost is significant, meaning if you were to cut it, I don't think, you know, your building is going to get hundreds of thousands of dollars less expensive. But I think it is worth noting, we talk a lot, and we're asked to talk a lot about ways that the schools offset budget expenses. And one of the main ways that we don't capture, for example, in the presentations that we get from the administration, are the ways in which parents and booster clubs offset our expenses. So you'll see in our budgets, for example, all of our sports teams, and we all know that there are many, the the school budget might fund the stipend for a head coach, but some of the larger teams, for example, the swim team, which has like 130 to 150 kids on it, those assistant coaches, because you just need them literally for supervisory reasons with that many children in a pool, all of those expenses are offset by parent contributions. So the ability that more teams will have by having a concessions stand that is consistent, I think you'll see dividends paid in the ways that parents and teams can offset a lot of the funding that would otherwise be in our budgets. So again, given the cost being nominal, I think that there's a really great value in having that dedicated space. Anyway.
I'm sorry, I was just saying we should table this though because the committee itself has not talked about it.
Tomorrow night, the consultants will be with us.
We're talking about it tomorrow, getting a full readout.
Okay, so tomorrow night, you're going to talk about this, and then you're going to bring it back to us in December 16th. Is that the plan?
Well, even before then, because we go to FinCom, right? Isn't it December 3rd?
Yeah, we meet with FinCom on the 5th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just my last comment, we have a substantial improvement going on to the Thoreau campus. And just to back up the point of how we try really hard not to bring requests to this group, there's $200,000 being funded there from previous capital requests, which will be a portion of. But on top of that, we're going to end up spending well over $1 million for a complete upgrade to the fields, the playground, all of the erosion control, the grounds themselves, a little bit more parking. So there's $200,000 coming from a previous capital request. All of the rest, $200,000 from a donation, an estate donation. There's a $450,000 CPC grant being very productively discussed with us right now for this coming town meeting. And there's a private fundraising group of Thoreau parents trying to raise another $400,000 to $500,000. So I just think it's really important that we know what we're not bringing as much as it is what we are. So thank you.
Dee, you had a question.
I do have a question, and it's about the slide where you had costs, your capital costs, and you were talking about roofing. And in the text, there was also a couple of sentences about one of the schools that, does have leaks and things like that. And I noticed on the slide that you're not going to, it's not scheduled for any kind of improvement until FY30. So I'm just wondering, can you just talk a little bit more about the types of issues you're having with the roofing at that school?
So we do have $200,000 for Thoreau. Thoreau's the school that we were discussing. And we do have $200,000 allocated to Thoreau in FY26. So I don't know which section you're looking at, but we do have $200,000 in FY26.
Okay.
So
And you would have a roof replacement scheduled when?
we have consultants that are looking, they're doing an analysis with us now. And
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
We have consultants. Hang on one sec.
This cord's not long enough. We need that one.
The consultants that did the full study are doing a follow-up look at alternatives. One of them is they're going to do infrared or thermal imaging, looking at what the condition of the roof is, wetness. They're looking at, there's one option could be a fluid application that overlays the existing roof membrane, but you can only do that in if the roof's in a certain condition. Another is full roof replacement. We need to see what they recommend and what the condition is when they do that. And one section of the roof might be different than the other. We have a flat roof in one area and a sloped roof in another area. So
the sloped roof is pretty new. They replaced it in the fire. So it's the flat roof they're looking at.
Okay.
So we're coming up to time.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if we have any other last minute questions. Remember, this is our first pass. We're going to have another chance. You're going to have a chance to FinCom, and then we'll have another joint meeting. But if there are any questions that anybody on FinCom would like to ask, Eric? We're good.
Okay.
Great. Okay, good.
Mary, we have just 2 or 3 more slides.
Oh, you do?
Just really a
Real
brief
quick.
overview right here. This is what our budget's going to look like. It's being built. So this is going to be our digital budget book next year. So I just wanted to give you a quick look. And So in the capital improvement, you'd be able to go in here as a resident, look at a one-year or the multi-year plan. So I'm going to go in and I selected the one-year plan. And when I talked about the level of detail and the work that has gone into it, so here's the request that all the departments put together. So I'm going to put fire departments, fire apparatus, rehab. And this is what Chief Judge put together, and he talks about when the project would happen, the length of the project, and then the description where he gets into, you know, what is a refurbishment? Why do we refurbish it? What does it mean for a fire truck to be refurbished after a number of years and prolong the life of that vehicle? So also included is pictures of the vehicles that we're replacing, and then also you could actually drill in and select this file right here, which is the fleet inventory, which is in Excel. So and that ties into what our replacement, refurbishment plans are for all of our assets that we're doing. So, you know, you can continue to scroll down and look at it over the 10 years right here. Break that down. Here's the cost of each of within the next 10 years, what he'd be looking at on refurbishing. And then scrolling down a little bit more on the funding sources and where we'd be paying for those if those projects were funded. So this is the level of detail that you're going to get in the budget, which is interactive, and I think it's a lot more user-friendly than the budget books in the past, and much more transparent in determining why, and that backs up the dollar amounts that we're asking for all our requests. So that's the last thing that I wanted to show you what we're working on.
Thank you, Anthony.
Just a quick question on that. Where are we going to be able to find that online?
So it'll be the same place. Actually, what I'd like to do is create another page called like Budget Central, and then put all of these presentations out for the public so they could view what you all have been looking at throughout the whole budget cycle. And then there'll be a link to the PDF version of the budget book if somebody wants to look at it that way, or you can go to the interactive site and kind of select and drill down and really look at each of the requests. You're welcome.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Carrie, Dr. Hunter, Bob. Eric, do you want to adjourn FinCom?
Sure. Do I have a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting?
So moved.
Second? Any seconds? Discussion? None? Motion, all in favor?
Do you want to adjourn the school committee?
I have a motion to adjourn the CCRSD school committee. Second. Yeah, all in favor? Aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Oh, no, sorry, I have one.
Thank you again. Thank you.
All in favor?
I have a name. I'm glad we're having this public meeting.
Don't forget these.
Wait, that we didn't have last week. Well, yeah, we had a chairman who had a different idea.
I might be able to get him some. I got it, Bob.
Okay.
I'll forget.
I might have to-
I do.
We're going to be moving directly to the public hearing in just a minute, so if you want to have a conversation about something else, please take it outside.
Please leave the room. We need to move ahead. I'm trying to.
Right back. Okay. 1 second.
Thank you. There you go.
Mark, talk now.
I think he's got
All right. Maybe they could take like a tentative vote.
Okay, do I have a motion to open the public hearing?
Move to open the public hearing on the fiscal year 2025 tax classification.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Cameron stepped out, but
Yeah, Cameron.
Oops.
Okay, we are opening the public hearing portion of the tax classification hearing. I want to remind people that we had a 2-hour forum on September 30th, and tonight we have a hard stop at 8:30. So I will allow comments, questions, and then I will cut them short so that the select board has time to deliberate before we vote. So I'm going to begin by asking our assessor, Meredith, to give us a presentation on the tax classification process.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Stone. I'm the town assessor, and tonight I'm going to talk about the fiscal year 2025 tax classification hearing. This will be a review of the fiscal year 2025 property tax levy and classification options. The timeline starts out as the annual town meeting in the spring. In September, the property valuation completed, and then we submit to the Department of Revenue. The residential forum happened in September, and tonight's the tax classification hearing, as it is November. Once then, we submit for the final rate certification state approval in December. In December, the tax bills will be issued. From January 1st to February 3rd is the abatement period. The purpose of the tax classification hearing is to determine whether to distribute the tax levy equally among all classes of property, or to reduce the share of the levy by the residential classes and shift some of the burden to the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes. The Select Board's role. The Select Board will consider 4 key decisions for tax classification hearing. To vote selection of a minimum residential factor, single or split tax rate, to vote whether to grant an open space discount, to vote whether to adopt a residential exemption, and to vote whether to adopt a small commercial exemption. The next slide are certified values for fiscal year 25. The total parcel count is 6,719. Class 1 residential is 8,741,097,979. Class 2 open space is 0. Class 3 commercial is 533,969,063. Class 4 industrial is 29,985,204. And Class 5 personal property is 74,664,390. A total of taxable value, $9,379,716,636. Property tax rate divided by the certified values. So if the levy was $116,237,779 divided by the values, the single tax rate, a factor of 1, with no shift, would be $12.39 per thousand. The next.
Sorry, is that levy the proposed I'm not.
No.
That's just class 1.
That's
That's
last
just-
year's?
That's, no, that's this year's, so
year's.
that's this year's levy divided by the values,
Okay.
without any, just, levy divided by values, if we
So-
did a single tax rate.
So just to be clear, the $116 million is the budgets that we've already voted through town meeting and are actually operating on now. So we hold the tax rate classification hearing in the middle of the fiscal year, and people who pay their property taxes directly have been paying estimated bills up until this point based on a calculation of what the rate was likely to be. And when we set this rate, that will become the final rate. And so that's why the third and fourth quarter fiscal
Gotcha.
bills are
Actuals.
actuals. Exactly.
And this is if it was a factor of 1 and no shift.
Very good.
On the next page, the tax rate calculation. So single rate with no shift, the tax rate would be $12.39 per thousand of assessed value. Showing the example again. On the left side is the average assessed values, single family, median assessed, average assessed condominiums, and medium assessed. For FY24, this includes the tax rate with the residential exemption and the senior means. That's why it's higher on the left side for the residential exemption taxes. On the right side would just be a single shift with no shift and just single on the right side, for example. And then the next page is a breakdown of the taxable properties. Class 1, we have 93.2% residential, so we're mostly residential in Concord. Class 2, open space, 0. Class 3, commercial is 5.69%. Class 4, industrial is 0.32%. And Class 5, personal property is 0.79%. Vote 1, selection of a minimum residential factor, single or split. What is a split rate? Communities decide to tax residential, commercial, industrial, and personal property differently. The state allows an increase in commercial, industrial, personal shares of the tax levy up to 50% higher than residential. It does not generate new revenue, but it reallocates the levy burden. Concord has used a single tax rate since 1998. On the first top is a minimum residential factor, giving you the single tax rate of $12.39. On the second half is the shifts, shifting between the commercial, industrial, and personal properties from 1.0 to 1.5. These are the examples. Vote 2, next page, whether to grant an open space discount. Open space is land maintained in an open or natural condition which contributes significantly to benefit enjoyment of the public and which is not subject to a permanent conservation restriction, held for production of income, and taxable under the provisions of chapter land, forestry, agricultural, and recreational. The Select Board may discount up to 25% of the open space shares of taxes. Historically, the town of Concord has not adopted an open space discount. Vote 3, whether to adopt a residential exemption. What is a residential exemption? Enacted in 1979, the residential tax exemption is an option under property tax classification, Mass General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 5C, that shifts the tax burden within the residential class from owners of moderately valued residential properties to the owners of vacation homes, higher value homes in residential properties not occupied by the owner, including apartments and vacant land. Next page. The residential tax exemption, the factor can go from 1 to 35% of the total average residential parcel value. The property must be a primary domicile of the owner as used for income tax purposes. The option exempts value only within the residential class of property. It does not change the levy, and it does not impact commercial, industrial, or personal property. The Select Board can authorize up to 35% to the residential exemption. 18 communities out of 351 communities in Massachusetts choose to adopt in FY23 to FY25, to the right showing the 18, and with the little caret showing the increase per last year to this year. The residential exemption is a fixed value reduction off the assessment for qualified taxpayers, meaning all qualified taxpayers receive the same amount subtracted from their assessed value. And the assessed value for the exemption is a percentage of the average residential value of the community. How it's calculated. Total residential value is $8,741,097,979. Total residential parcel count gives you the average residential value. And we chose 10% for this example, and 10% of that would be 144,338 residential coming off of your taxes. This year, we have a definite number of qualifying residential parcels. As of today, there's 3,870. The total residential exemption value is $558,588,60, and the total residential value minus the exemption value gives you a value of $8,182,509,919. The even point is the residential value divided by the number of qualifying residents, and that's $2,258,682. In the next three examples, I have a 5% residential exemption, I have a 10% and a 15%. The first page is 5%. The exempt amount evaluation would be $72,169. The left side is non-qualifying residential properties, and the increase is on the last slide on the variance increase. On the right side is with residential exemption. In red, showing the credit of how much you'd receive off your taxes if you fall within that valuation. If you go within the break-even point, after that or more, it starts to increase, and that will be the increase of value in your taxes. The next page would be 144, 338 for 10%. And the following page would be 216, 507 for 15% of the exemption amount. Options for residential exemption. There are many options. You could go 1% to 35% per what the select board chooses, and the exemption amounts would show in those increments. The tax rate changes. For example, if you chose 5%, $72,169 would come off the valuation of your assessed value of your home. The tax rate would increase to $1,280, and you get a total amount off your bill of $923.76. The next would be 10%. You get $144,338 valuation off your value of your property. The tax rate would increase to $13.24, and you'd get a total of $1,911.04 off your tax bill. And 15% would be $216,507 off the valuation of your tax bill. Your taxes would increase $13.71 per thousand, and you get $2,968.31 off your taxes, depending on where you fall in your valuation. The next page is vote for whether to adopt a small commercial exemption. The select board could adopt an exemption that reduces the taxable values by up to 10% of eligible commercial parcels. Eligible businesses must have an average annual employment of not more than 10 people during the previous calendar year. The assessed value of the parcel occupied by eligible businesses must be $1 million or less. In order for a commercial parcel to qualify, every business occupying the parcel must also qualify for this exemption. This exemption shifts the tax burden within the commercial, industrial, personal property classes from small commercial properties to larger commercial and industrial parcels. Increases for commercial, industrial, personal property tax rate, and the exemption goes to the building owner, not the business owner. So depending on a lease agreement, or small business owners may or may not benefit. It's similar to the residential exemption, but in the commercial exemption side. Concord has not historically adopted this exemption. Then I have an addenda attached. Addendum 1 is historical levy data from 2018 to 2024. And this year projected levy is $116,237,779. Addendum 2 is classification hearing terminology. And then the last addendum 3 is certified by the Department of Revenue, showing for FY24 the assessed values, and FY25 the assessed values, and the percentage of differences. Now, last year we saw a 20% increase in valuations in residential. The year before we saw 15. From COVID years to now, we've seen numerous amount of increases due to the fact of uncharted buying of market values that have gone, now they're leveling off. The single family has increased from last year to this year 1.9%, and condominiums have increased 3.1%. A total residential increase for the town has been 1.8%, and total commercial is 1.1, total industrial is 1.4, and total personal property is 5.1. Overall, for the town's real and personal property increase is 1.8. And that's the end.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm going to open it up to questions from the Select Board before I entertain comments from the public. Does the Select Board have any questions for Meredith about the facts that she's presented
I
here?
have one.
Go ahead.
In addendum number 1, the excess levy capacity as percentage of maximum levy, they're showing it up there.
Okay. What were you saying?
Okay.
Yeah.
So it looks like we were in the 4% range, and then suddenly last year it went way down. Can you explain what happened there? What that means? Like what's causing it?
So I believe they're using the levy, a little bit more of the levy to, I think, the school and things of that nature to try to offset the tax rate.
The levy limit increased 7.6% last year, which is pretty high compared to prior years.
Levy limit went
I'm not
up.
the levy limit, I'm sorry, the total tax levy was higher last year. It went up 7.6% over 2023.
I don't really get involved in the levy part of it.
Right, well, maybe Anthony or Carrie can answer. Is this reason for concern? I'm just trying to figure out what happened with this.
This is just the DOI.
Yes.
So as I went through it, Terry, in the last presentation, as far as us tapping into that excess levy capacity.
Right.
So it went down, yeah, we were hovering at the 4, and I think, looking forward, it's like at 3, and that's one of the exercises that the Finance Committee is going to be talking about on Thursday to see if there's a way that we can stabilize that to
Okay.
maintain a certain percentage of growth. It's all budget driven, though.
So what was causing it then? Just that we were spending more?
Yes.
Okay. I see, okay.
Yeah, it's consistent with what we saw earlier as far as heading into an override.
Yep.
Oh, that other one over there?
I have a question about the taxable property classes where you've got residential,
Let me see what page.
page 7 in your slide deck, Meredith,
Okay.
where you've got the, you want to go back there? Just for my education, what's the difference between commercial, industrial, and personal property?
So industrial is, personal property is they tax businesses inside their personal property, their desks, their phones, their pizza ovens, their
Inventory?
restaurant equipment. So that would be personal property tax inside.
Okay.
Industrial would be, telephone wires, those type of poles and things of that nature. And commercial is commercial businesses.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question. On page 16, with how the RTE is calculated, I remember last year we had quite a bit of discussion about what the number of qualifying residential parcels might be, and I think we estimated something like 4,000.
Yeah, last year, because we were implementing the program, it was a guesstimate since we didn't have all the applications in, and it was sort of a movement to quickly get, this to go. So we had to do an estimate. This year I have actuals, so we have actually 3,870 qualifying. So this is a definite, and more to come up until April 1st. And usually people that bought new homes last year weren't qualified last year, but would be qualified this year, things of that nature.
Yeah, that has to do with what my question is. My quick math of 3,870 versus 6,056 is about 63% of the parcels actually qualify, which leaves a fairly substantial percentage that haven't qualified. Do we have a sense of whether that's kind of close to the maximum number that would qualify, or do we need to make an allowance for the idea that there might be additional properties qualify?
I think we need to make an allowance, maybe another 300, due to the fact that people are now starting to qualify that bought homes before, or people that want to make Concord their domicile opposed to having Florida their domicile or New Hampshire their domicile. A lot of people switch and change.
So, sorry, Mark, you?
No, that's it.
So,
What
so
if- yeah, I was just gonna s-
sorry, just picking up on that, right? So if the number of residential parcels that qualify goes up, means more people get the break, right? I think that means then that the rate with the RTE would actually have to go higher? Is that right? Because more people would qualify.
Right, so you have to
So as more
generate-
people go up, you're going to see an even bigger increase in the tax rate.
To offset, yeah, we have to raise the monies to distribute it.
So can I just ask a question, though? I mean, we're voting tonight on this rate, which assumes 3,870. If we think there's more, or to your point, we make a reserve, is that reserve part of, can it come out of the overlay?
So
or
it
how
comes
does-
out of the overlay.
Okay,
As
just wanna check.
the amount that's a definite will come on the tax rate. So 3870 is a definite as of now, and that would be the tax rate. Anything after that, once the bills are out, would come out of the overlay.
Great.
And we already have
That's
all
what I
those
was-
reserves set for that. yeah.
Okay. So the rate doesn't, we're voting the rate tonight.
Right.
Yeah,
Anything over that?
After that would
You
come
have
out
it,
of the
you have a
overlay.
reserve in the overlay.
I do.
Got it.
So, sorry, just picking up on one more question. So when we were here in September, my recollection is the rate without the RTE was something like 12.24. The rate with the RTE at 10% was 13.13.
And that
So-
was last year's value.
Yeah, so these have gone up. So I'm just curious what's driving the higher, because again, it's higher rates, and then as more people qualify for the RTE, the rates are going to go even higher than that. So I'm just,
So now the levy has increased, so,
Okay.
and the value's increased and the levy's increased, so you have to bring in more monies for that.
got it, thanks.
But it's mostly levy.
Right.
Mostly levy.
The valuations were pretty small this year.
Right.
Is that correct, right?
Right.
So it was what, was it 1%?
It was 1.8 for the total
And last year
town.
was 15.
20, yeah.
It was 20.
Right.
I did
And
the
the-
math on-
Oh, good. What do you got? What do
on
you
the
got?
I did the math on the single rate. So last year, had we used the single rate, which was $12.24,
Right.
compared to this year's single rate of $12.39 is a 15-cent change, which turns out to be a 1.2% year-on-year increase, apples to apples, single rate to single rate. And the calculation, assuming that the RTE, which was adopted at 10% last year, was $13.12. And if we were to adopt it again this year at 10%, that's $13.24, which is a 12-cent increase, or a 0.9/1%. So slightly less than the actual change in the single rate would be the change in the RTE rate year on year.
And we also have to factor senior means, which is 1 or 2 pennies difference would
Yeah.
increase this, yeah.
Any other questions from the select board? No? Okay, I'm going to open it up for public comment. I think what I'll do is, we've got a lot of people on Zoom, so I think I'll tag between the room and Zoom. So first in the room?
And we were going to take public comments for 2 minutes per.
2 minutes
I just
per.
have a couple questions. Can I ask my questions and then have a comment later? or
It's
do you-
comment.
I have a couple questions.
Well, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
For my questions or the replies?
You've got 2 minutes, Mr. Martinez.
Can you tell us, thank you, Meredith, can you tell us, do you have a value for the assessment of all the nonprofits in town? So when we
I
talk about
do.
the pilot, what that number is?
Yep, so it's right, exempt parcels and value is on the 5th page. It's $1,152,658,000.
Okay, and then last year, I remember a slide which had the sort of 3 separate buckets of under $1 million, $1 million to $2 million, and over $2 million. And what was really impactful last year, I think it was a 5% for under $1 million, 11%, 1 to 2, and then 22%. And That really drove huge tax increases because the RTE was on top of that, in some cases 22% increase. So do you have the numbers for this year as far as what the 23 sales say?
I have everything online, and they're all publicized for whatever type of, Excel that you want to fill out and do your, and if there's anything else you need, if you can email me, I can send you what you need, but everything's publicized online as of today.
Great. So I just have a couple points. First, I don't think we've ever seen disclosure of the amount of sort of tax reduction different people have gotten in, particularly, if you think about the select board, we have the chair of the select board getting a tax reduction of $1,300 a year. We have one member getting $800 and two members $500 apiece, with one member actually paying an additional $300. And I'd note that there's been no evidence to show that the RTE is making Concord more affordable. The lower assessed values are going up. I suspect that's what your data says for 23 sales. And there's still a division as far as voters at town meeting with, sort of separate classes of some people's taxes going down and some going up. I find it ironic that the town, including the town manager and the select board, wants to spend $100,000 to study turf fields. And for 2 years, a number of us
Mr. Martinez,
have been asking.
Can you wrap up your overtime?
A number of us have asking about, why, for a study committee on the RTE. So my question to the select board is, you guys have enacted the largest shift in Concord's history. You're shifting $8 million of taxes from one group to another. And could you please tonight state your objection and why you continue not to form the an RTE committee?
I think we can batch questions.
You want to go online? Do we have a question online?
We did.
We did. We did have a question online, but now their hand is gone. Okay, I'm going to stick on the floor. Oh, no.
I have a question, but there's no option to raise your hand.
Yes. Same here.
Okay, I see Mike Mahoney.
My hand, it's under react.
I see a hand raised. It's Mr. Mahoney?
Correct, yep.
Okay, Mr. Mahoney, you want to go ahead? You've got 2 minutes.
Sure. I just wanted to express my strong support for the RTE. Contrary to what the previous person said, I'm a realtor, and I can tell you without a doubt that a residential tax exemption absolutely helps people to qualify on the first-time home buyers to qualify for a mortgage. It's much more favorable when they're trying to go through that process. And it could be the make or break thing that either allows them to move into Concord or not. So contrary to what has been said, that is not true. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. I'm going to go on the floor. Mr. Garofalo?
John Garofalo, 51 Coolidge Road, member of the Finance Committee, speaking for myself. Just a clarification is, after the public hearing, is it where the select board's going to discuss and then vote? Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so buried on page 94 of this presentation and hidden in a footnote, the chair has already stated that she's voting for the RTE as a member of the Affordable Housing Trust. And so I'm not sure how that jives with this meeting if you've already made up your decision. I think between what was already said about how 3 of the select board put money in their pockets from this vote without a study or much thought whatsoever, you're horribly conflicted, you're ethically compromised, and I'm shocked the town manager or town council hasn't looked into this further. I think just doing a study, you would have appeased anyone pro or con, and yet again, horrible conflicting of the select board. Thank you.
Mr. Garofalo, I'm going to address your comment. We have checked both our town council and with the State Ethics Commission to see if, given our positions as residents and how this would impact our personal property tax, means that we have to recuse ourselves from this vote. And in fact, both our town council and the State Ethics Commission has said that since more than 10% of the residents in Concord will benefit, or more than 10% won't benefit, then we do not have to recuse ourselves. And I want to make another point. Every single person on this board has a financial interest. There are some of us that will benefit, so we might be biased to vote for us. There are some of us who will not benefit, and they might be biased to vote against it. So we all have a potential bias. And yet, based on legal counsel, based on the State Ethics Commission, we do have a duty as elected officials on the select board to take a vote.
Fair, and that's why you would create a study to make sure that you
That's a different issue, and we'll address that later.
How about the fact that you already voted on page 94 in the footnote?
I voted as a member of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust to write a letter.
So are you voted, no, it says vote for the RTE. It's specific.
Vote to
in that.
recommend affirmative
So
action,
how-
yes.
So how can you be fair in your discussion? You've already voted, and this is supposed to be hearing.
I have already made up my mind. That is true. That has nothing to do with whether I benefit or not. I have already made up my mind.
Do we want to call on Scott Smigler from Zoom, please?
Hi, and thank you for taking these comments. Scott Smigler, 1266 Monument Street. The RTE is widely recognized as bad policy for towns like Concord. No comparable communities, those that are not cities and lack significant vacation home markets like the Cape, have adopted it. Not a single one. While many have considered it, they have consistently followed expert advice from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue and decided against implementation. If you look at the guide to the RTE that the DOR provided, you will see that. Even the former chair of Concord Select Board acknowledged this was not sound policy when supporting it the first time, calling it a blunt instrument. That individual was later voted out of office and replaced by a candidate who explicitly opposed the RTE and was the top vote getter in the last election. Despite this, none of the supporters of the RTE on the Select Board have made a clear argument for why Concord should disregard the judgment of experts in other towns across the state. Why should Concord Select Board knowingly support a policy that experts agree is unsuitable for a community like ours? Your primary responsibility as elected officials is to make sound policy decisions. It is your duty, as stated in the oath that you took, to act faithfully and impartially in the interest of all residents. Implementing bad policy not only fails to fulfill that duty, but also has serious long-term consequences for the community. The impact on residents, particularly those who may otherwise have moved to or stayed in Concord, will be significant. Ultimately, this bad policy will be overturned, and when that happens, the responsibility for its negative effects will fall on those who supported it. Residents who could have remained in Concord sustainably will have been unnecessarily pushed out because of a focus on a flawed policy rather than true serious solutions to supporting senior residents and those that are truly vulnerable. This is not a serious policy, it is a gimmick. It is not too late to reverse this decision. Doing so would show that you have listened to the voters in the last election and that you are willing to prioritize the town's long-term well-being over short-term mistakes. Continuing to pursue the RTE, however, undermines this trust. For the 4 members of the Select Board who have supported the RTE, voting for this policy does create a moral conflict, even if not a legal one. Taxes you owe as residents of Concord.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up.
Under the guise of fairness.
You're well over your time. Please wrap it up.
I will, thank you. I appreciate that. This is a deeply cynical approach, and while it may not breach your oath directly, many residents who do not benefit from the RTE saw property tax increases of 35 to 45% last year in their tax bill. And as home values decline as a result, even more homes will face higher tax bills in this future. Please reverse this bad policy, and I do appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Scott Smigler at 1266 Monument Street.
Thank you. And now we're going into the room.
Great. Jim Naris, 341 Madison Drive. So I was at this meeting a year ago and spoke, and as you guys all remember that were here, it divided the town. There were arguments going back and forth. And I know somebody even made an argument that in other towns that it had been implemented, it divided the town too, and it clearly divided the town with the last meeting. But And I actually got, because of me speaking, I got accused as I was leaving of being a Trump supporter, whatever that means. But that just goes, again, about the divisive nature of this too. But I felt better after the meeting because you, Mary, mentioned afterwards that this is something that has to be voted on every year, that is obviously getting implemented at that time. But you said that you're the one that said that the study committee, would be formed between now and then to see how it affected the town. So now knowing that that obviously didn't happen, I feel worse. But I remember, Mark, you at the end of the meeting afterwards mentioned the fact that when it had to be reported again, you made the comment that you can't give it to people and then take it away, which gave me the impression that your vote is already going to be for it, obviously going forward. And so again, I think it would make people feel better if you followed through with the study that you said you were going to do, which hasn't been done. And it's just, again, I just don't see the disadvantages to that. Obviously there's some cost, but as has been mentioned already, there are other committees being formed that I personally feel are less important in figuring out things than this. So I would like to know the reasons, the disadvantages to not having the study committee.
Thank you. Going online.
Joe Lauren.
Mr. Lauren.
Need to unmute Joe. Try again.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, Joe Lauren, 134 Southfield Road. So I would actually like Mary and maybe others from the select board to answer the question. It's been asked twice as to why you will not do this study. So you've already answered some questions and you're sort of picking and choosing which ones, but I'd like you to answer that one. That's thing number one. The thing number two is that this is a Band-Aid. It really avoids the real problem, which is a lack of fiscal discipline and overspending in our town. And in fact, it's worse. It actually is a crutch to spend more and then not have to be responsible to the public because you're shifting those dollars to a minority of people who, and the majority of people can say, yeah, great, let's spend the money, but they don't have to carry any of that burden. It's not a fair thing at all. And I also think you should address this issue despite saying that legal counsel has, technically given you the bye here. You're facing your fellow Concordians here. 4 people on this steering committee, on this select board, will benefit from this, the passage of this RTE again. I think you have to look people in the eye and address this conflict. And a study would be the perfect way of doing that. It would be an independent board with people who some would benefit, some would not. And that would be the best way to do this, as you've already committed to doing. Finally, I think you guys should address the question of whether or not this has worked. We've had a year of it. What were the objectives? And were those objectives met? And how are we measuring whether or not this is good policy or not? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lauren. Ms. Schoeneman.
But Mary, does this?
Go ahead.
Hi, Jennifer Schoeneman.
I will answer your question at the end of after I hear all the comments.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you for taking the question. Jennifer Schoeneman, 712 Monument Street. I just want to start by saying there's a little bit of cavalierness in the way I'm hearing you say, oh, it's only a few pennies more, it's only X% more. Some of us are still reeling from having our assessed property values almost double over the last couple of years, and then you add this on top of it, and it's really an enormous burden. Town meeting last year, we made some big decisions together about the importance of investing in our communities and investing in our schools, and this RTE came up after that. And since then, it just feels deeply, deeply unfair. It feels like a bait and switch. It's also very unclear what the objective of that was, and have we achieved that objective? How has it affected renters? There's been no conversation about this, and RTE was passed last year without even the Finance Committee looking at it. So why did we do it, and why have you refused to conduct this study that everybody's calling for and that you requested last year? You're talking about 10% now, but for those of us that are being affected by this, you now have free rein to raise it as high as 35%. And we really need to think about, is this a community that we want to stay in? It's a huge financial burden, and I think you can't be cavalier about it and be a little more clear about why you did this in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schoeneman. I'm going online. Is there anyone online? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Mr. Bader.
Thank you. Stephen Bader, 7 River Street, speaking on my own behalf, not as a member of the Concord Housing Authority or any other group I'm affiliated with. I hear a lot of calls for a study, and that's all well and good. I think it's worthwhile to look back and see what the effects of your policies are over time. But I don't think anybody can reasonably say that you're going to be able to come to a conclusion with 1 year's worth of data. I really don't. People don't make decisions about major investments and where to live and where will they live 2 years from now based on 1 year's worth of data. Many of those who are complaining about the increase in their taxes are overlooking the fact that the biggest driver of their tax increase was the change in their market valuation, not the effect of the residential tax exemption. Many people complaining about the fact that their houses are worth more are complaining about having to pay more taxes. They're not actually complaining about being more, having a higher net worth a year ago now than they did a year ago. So keep that in mind too. Some of the people complaining, I won't complain. I will say that for a very, very large number of residents in Concord who may not be standing at the microphone right now, they have received a benefit that helped them enormously. And I don't think the people who are speaking against this have any conception of what that $1,877 meant to a family that makes $40,000, $50,000 a year. They just don't get it. Thank you.
Anybody online? I see a hand raised. Ms. Gilbert? You're muted. You're muted.
Keep trying to unmute.
You can hear me now.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. I just wanted to put a face upon what the gentleman who just spoke said. I understand that this can be a burden from start to finish for people who are in different circumstances. I just want to explain that for some of us, it's not a matter of whether I choose to live in Concord or not, because it's a burden. It's a matter of whether I can live in Concord or not. I'm a retired teacher, and that is the income. I stretched as far as I could to live here at 5 Concord Green. And I'm so appreciative of what this has done for me. And it doesn't mean that I don't feel for the people who are in circumstances on the other side. I also want you to know that as an educator, I did not vote on my personal best interest when I voted for the best schools possible in the community where I live, knowing that the tax burden could possibly have me unable to live here. I just wish that we will all see all sides, and this is the part that I wanted to contribute for myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert. In the room.
Good evening, Jennifer Clark, Blueberry Lane. Full disclosure, and I'm one of the other sides of this, I guess, is that my home falls into a category where I actually saw a benefit. And so you might be wondering why I'm coming out tonight to speak against RTE when I'm one of the winners. And that's what's happening here. We're developing winners and losers. So there's two concerns for me. One is sort of how we divide the tax burden, and then the issue of how we get here, which is our taxes. So we've got to look at how we arrived at this point and why we're seeing the escalation of taxes. And I appreciate the fiscal prudence that you're all bringing, but just like in my home and everyone else's home, we have to make decisions on what we can and can't do. And I think we're really at a crux of where we need to do that as a town. There's a lot of essentials and there's a lot of non-essentials. What I'd like to say, and again, I benefit from RTE, but it's flawed, it's discriminatory. It assumes that I don't understand what someone's doing when they're making $50,000 a year and I'm not. It's judgy. It pits residents against each other. It's an oversimplification to say that a person's ability to pay is based on their home. $2.1 million or less saw a reduction in taxes of a property value. It boggles my mind that well-earning residents in homes of less than $2.1 million got a tax break. It is not needs-based at all. It's because they filled out the pink form and got it in on time. It's arbitrary. I implore you, please, to focus on real solutions. Eliminate the RTE. Diversify and strategically grow our commercial tax base. We're 93% heavy on residential taxes. We need to reduce our over-reliance on residential property taxes. We need worker and senior housing development solutions so that people can stay and grow in our community.
I need you to wrap up.
Yep, here's my last sentence. Promote and expand access to existing tax relief programs for our seniors, ensuring that they are able to take full advantage of the support that is currently available. Please, no winners and losers.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Anybody online?
I don't see anything.
Nobody online. I'll take one more comment. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So my comment regarding RT, as you all read Concord Bridge, introduce myself.
Yeah.
Olena Danilchenko, Monument Farm Road. So
I'm
as
sorry,
you
can
all...
you say that again?
Yeah,
Your name?
no, I have a very complex last name. I'll spell it for you.
Thank you.
Okay. As we all read the Concord Bridge, you will see transactions that happen in this town. Some weeks more, some weeks less. Majority of them, 8 out of 10, are $1 transactions. What are those transactions in terms of selling the house? Is somebody selling the home that is $500,000, $1 million, $2, $3, $5 million for $1? No, they don't. What they do is they keep their property in the family and the trusts, because majority, 88% of these homes in Concord are subsidized by 12%. So it's a great, smart decision to keep such subsidized property in your family. And so which would show to me, looking at those numbers, is that 8 out of 10 Concordians do not need money to continue on with their lives. They just keep it in the family. So I think it's unfair that 12% subsidize the family investments and growth of properties that just people keep in the family.
Thank you. I think we have no more comments online, right? Right. Okay, good. I'm going to address the question that Mr. Lauren brought up about why we have not called for a task force. I want to go back to the original reason why we instituted the RTE to begin with. And if you remember, it came about because we have a senior means tested tax exemption, which was instituted with the hope that we would be able to let seniors stay and age in place in Concord in their home. And the problem with the senior means tested tax exemption is that it only had, this year it has 34 people who qualify. So we looked at what else is available to us. What does the state give us as far as tools that we can use to help people in this situation? And that was the goal, and it remains the goal. And we found that one of the tools we have available to us is the RTE. And at the time, we thought, let's give it a try. Let's see how it works, and let's see if it meets the goal. Right now, if we were to do a study, it would be based on speculative data. It would be based on modeling what we think would happen in the future. If we wait 2 or 3 years, we will have actual data, actual observable data, so that we can say, did it meet the goals that we had? And again, the goal is clear, to help people stay in their homes. The other reason why I did not bring up implementing a task force on the agenda for any select board meeting is because I found that many of the people who are calling for a task force aren't really looking at how do we keep people in their homes. They were more interested in how do we discredit the RTE. So to some of these people, I reached out and I said, there are other tools available. For example, the state allows something called, I'm going to get technical here, a 41C1/2, which is a senior means tested tax exemption that is not asset limited. In other words, it's means tested, but it doesn't disqualify people who have a bigger asset base. So I called out to these people and I said, are you interested in studying this as maybe an example of another alternative to the residential tax exemption? I've got no response. I've called out to people and I said, there are rules available in the state that allows us to give exemptions to renters. And I've asked, are you interested in looking at that as a way to kind of mitigate some of the unpleasant things, some of the things that we're worried about with the RTE? And I'm making this call again. If people are interested in looking at what is available to us to help renters, and there are things available, I'd be happy to help you do that. If there are people that are willing to look at this 41C1/2, which is a senior means tested that has no asset limit, I'd be happy to help you with that. But as far as the RTE goes, I'm concerned that I really wouldn't be able to find a group of people that were really objective. Especially unless we have at least a few years of data to look at to see if in fact it is meeting the goals that we set out, which is, how do we help people stay in their homes in Concord, given the fact that our property taxes are increasing? It's the problem, and several of you have said that the problem is our taxes are increasing, and we emphasized this at the September 30th forum. Our taxes are increasing because of spending. The RTE has the least impact on the property tax increases of every single home we have looked at. We have looked at homes across the entire spectrum of assessed value. In every single home, the main reason why their taxes increased was increase in valuation, the debt on the middle school, and increased spending. The RTE had a minimal impact. So blaming the RTE is not really getting to the fundamental problem, which is spending. And that's up to town meeting. That's not up to the select board. So I've just said a lot. So, in answer to your question as to why I have not put the task force on the select board agenda, it's because I am looking for people who are really dedicated to the problem, or what tools do we have available to us to help seniors age in place. And also, I truly am concerned as far as getting people who would be objective. And that's all I'll say about that, because I've said a lot. Okay, I think I'm going to end the public hearing now, and I'm going to have the select board deliberate.
I move to close the public hearing on the FY25 tax classification.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's have comments, questions about the...
So I'm going to echo and say that I agree with the things that Mary has mentioned. I'd also add, from the perspective of history, that the select board started discussing and in fact indicated its interest in pursuing the RTE at the August 7th, 2023 meeting, and held numerous discussions of the implementation up until last November 20th, which was when we actually voted the RTE in. So I do find it, interesting and not altogether hard to understand that some folks may feel like this came up fairly quickly, but I do feel like it has been discussed. I also agree with the idea that there needs to be some data developed over time about what the impact of the RTE is on Concord. And I think that there's nothing wrong with paying attention, bringing that information forward when you have it, especially new information. And I'm inclined to keep the RTE in place and continue to evaluate its effectiveness at doing exactly what we were talking about, which is trying to make Concord, which does have an affordability challenge, a little bit more affordable for those people who are on more limited means. It is not a perfect tool. There will never be a perfect tool. It's just one of the very few options that we have available to us.
Any comments from others?
So I guess I just say a few things. I just, as this conversation's been going on, not just tonight, but throughout the whole last year, there've been a lot of feedback, some very favorable, and obviously some just dissenting and not agreeing with the RTE. And I agree it's creating some divisiveness in the community. I also think that people are concerned that it doesn't fit Concord. Many of the communities that implemented RTE are sort of vacation communities, and their purpose was really supporting their full-time residents throughout their towns. But I think that we're much more aligned with Brookline and supporting really the affordability, because that really is our purpose, is trying to make sure that this will be not just a place for the haves and have-nots, but really sincerely promoting more diversity within town. I think the RTE will promote some owner occupancy, and I think there is a benefit to supporting lower valued homes. It will bring or preserve some economic diversity that we have in town, and I hope it will help with our workforce housing supports as well. And I also think there's some indirect benefits that some have commented around preserving just lower valued homes in that they're not being sold and then destroyed and turned into much larger homes. I think that's very important. I did look actually at some of the rental properties. About 2.5% of our property real estate is dedicated to apartments, but there's another 3% that are in multi-home, multi-house, multi-family housing. And a third of those owners actually are benefiting from the RTE, so they are getting the benefit from their properties. So a lot of people benefit from this, even the homes that are above the break point. Many people are benefiting from that as well. So I certainly continue to support the use of the RTE, and I do think that it's important that having multi-years would help better assess it in the longer run, but I think we need to continue to move forward with the RTE.
Terry, you want to say something?
Yes, I also agree. This is a blunt instrument. We've said that all along. It's the best we could find that's legal within the state. We've tried to put in local options, special legislation. They have not advanced. Also, I want to address the point about this board. If 4 out of 5 of us have benefited, that may be true. I didn't look through all of it. But in town in general, it did look to me like 70 to 80% of the households were above the break even and were benefiting, so we are in the same proportion. I wanted to make that statement. I also do feel that 1 year of data is not enough. I did check with Meredith in the assessor's office, and we have 140 new applications this year. So, running a program for 1 year, you might not get the publicity out there. Now we have more people signing up. So I think we do need probably at least 3 years of data to really be able to take a look. And finally, I wanted to address about the renters, because we do have in the packet the letter from the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. And I, for one, would be interested, Mary, in looking into that. I know that some towns have looked into it, but I don't know much about it. But it does specify, you know, Chapter 59, Section 50, and all of this. And I would be happy to work with whoever on that, because I think we should look into that.
I would agree with that, actually, we definitely should.
Well, we're call for volunteers. If people are interested in the impact on renters, there's a tool available to us that we need to learn more about.
That'd be
And
great.
I think the last person.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to make some slightly different comments here. So first off, I have trust in the people of Concord that we would be able to find qualified folks who could help us with any sort of study that we want to do. So I'm going to read a few things here. So like I started with in the September RTE session, I'm going to start with full disclosure. So there are 2 McKenna homeowners in Concord. My parents, who still live in the house I grew up in, they benefited from the RTE by $1,085. For myself and my wife, we paid an extra $384. So the total for the RTE for us in the Concord family is actually a net gain of $701. But with that out of the way, here's some other thoughts. So, you know, in 1775, right, the great citizens of Concord and Boston rallied against Britain, and their slogan was, "No taxation without representation." Here we are, 250 years later, and Concord's Select Board has turned the tables and decided that it can and should tax many of its citizens without giving them a voice. No study committee, no disclosure, no vote for town residents, and obviously, as it was mentioned in today's meeting packet, a letter showing that this hearing is perfunctory because people have already made up their minds. The data shows that our taxes and spending are at the extreme high end. Unfortunately, the trend is not getting better, it's getting worse. So by 2030, the average bill is projected to be 47% higher than it is today. It's an alarming figure that one Finance Committee member recently referred to as horrifying. And the RTE does nothing to address these underlying issues. It does nothing to address the total tax burden on our citizens. It's a divisive policy that the Select Board voted to give $7 million of tax decreases to certain people while forcing other citizens in our town to bear the brunt of tax increases. The RTE option was put in place to help towns in Massachusetts under 2 very specific circumstances: high-end vacation homes and towns with very high percentages of rental units where homeowner income is close to renter income. These 2 descriptions don't come anywhere close to describing Concord. The RTE negatively impacts renters, which we've talked about. The RTE also provides tax breaks to millionaires who own homes valued at $2.1 million. That's not a blunt instrument. That's an egregiously flawed program. There is a difference. So saying we're going to put in place an egregiously flawed program and then later we're going to study its impacts, I don't know. To me, that logic doesn't sort of fly. And by the way, Lexington actually studied this before they looked at implementing it. So this notion that we need multiple years of data, I'm not sure I get there. So for seniors, there are actually already multiple state and town property tax relief programs outside of the RTE. Massachusetts recently doubled senior property tax relief to more than $2,700. Concord has programs that provide up to 50% property tax relief, Community Preservation Act tax exclusion, and 4% subsidized reverse mortgages. So, for me, I'm going to vote to discontinue the residential tax exemption paired with 2 other actions that I would strongly recommend. Number 1, let's look at how we can improve senior tax relief programs and increase awareness to make sure that our seniors who qualify can take full advantage. And number 2, let's commit to working together to reduce our town and school spending and the corresponding property tax increases that are challenging all of the citizens of Concord. Let's separate our wants from our needs. Let's benchmark our spending. Let's scrutinize our hires. Let's insist on strong business cases. And let's not just add costs to existing bloated spend categories. Let's really dig in. We owe it to our citizens to do better on taxes and spending, and the RTE doesn't get us there.
Mary, can I follow up on that for a minute?
Sure, go ahead.
So I do agree with some of what Pam said, particularly we all need to work together to decrease spending. That is the real elephant in the room. I definitely think we need to do that. In terms of the study, what hasn't been said tonight, I've been on the board the longest, and I'm about to go off, so. But we have been talking about this way before the date Mark mentioned. We have been trying to solve this problem the whole time I've been on the board, way before that even. I came on the board in 2019. We've been discussing it all those years. And specifically the RTE, I know was discussed at least as early as 2022, with the assessors coming in and presenting data. So we did not do the same study as Lexington, but we have been looking at data and deliberating about it. And finally, it was suggested to me by someone that this is a really divisive issue. 5 people in town maybe cannot decide. Maybe we need an article, a resolution to see what do the citizens want to do in town. And maybe the select board should consider putting in some type of article in this town meeting so we can have the citizens vote and have that voice.
Thank you, Terry. Are we ready for a motion?
So we have several actions to take up, and the first one is not the RTE.
Right.
I would make a motion to select the residential factor single rate for FY25.
Second.
All in favor?
Any
Aye.
discussion?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah,
Great.
Yeah,
Okay.
any discussion on that?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
I would make a second motion to not adopt the open space credit, open space discount.
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and I would make a motion to adopt a residential tax exemption of 10%, continuing our practice from last year for FY25.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay. Opposed.
It passes 4-1.
And finally, I would make a motion to not adopt a small commercial exemption.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. It's 8:30.
All right. Good.
That brings us to public comments,
It does.
right on time.
Yeah.
Do we have any public comments on, things that aren't on the agenda?
Don't see any on Zoom.
Good. Then
Okay,
we'll-
seeing none, I would move the consent agenda with thanks for the gifts to the Concord 250 gift account from Ann Hayden, the Fenn School, and the Middlesex School.
Can I, sorry, on the consent agenda?
Yes.
Is that the committee, is that including the committee?
This includes, no.
No,
Not the
okay.
nominations.
Okay. This is, the consent agenda is the minutes of November 4th.
I was just trying to find
The
it.
town accountant warrants for October 31st and
Does
November
do you
4th.
want anything, does anybody want anything taken off of the consent agenda?
No.
Okay.
It does include, just on appointments, a residential
Yeah.
exemption for one.
Yeah, no, I was more
Member-
looking at
Okay.
the
You're okay with
nominations.
that?
Great.
Sorry.
Okay,
So
good.
consent
Good.
agenda,
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
aye.
Okay. So,
Select board nominations, go ahead.
select board nominations. So move to nominate, Move to nominate Agnes.
So can I ask before we?
Yes.
So I didn't know if are these replacements?
I can speak to the DEI Commission one. It is in fact a replacement for a member who is now serving on the town meeting subcommittee.
So they're dropping off of DEI?
Yeah.
Okay.
A previous member resigned from the DEI.
Got it.
Commission, so
Okay.
this is a replacement.
Yeah, no, I just didn't know if I just was.
Okay.
Benny, are you interested in the Concord Cultural Council?
Yeah, if we
That's
know.
in addition, because that committee is understaffed.
They're understaffed, okay, so we need the.
Understaff's the wrong
Sorry,
word.
so I just want
They're
to, like,
shorthanded.
like
Shorthanded.
they recommended, or they know,
Yes.
they recommended,
Yes.
yes, we
Yeah.
want to add a person.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
and they
it's part
sort
of
of,
their charge that they have these seats available.
got it.
So-
That's all, just wanted to
Yep.
make
Yeah.
sure I understood,
Move
thanks.
to nominate Agnes Labega and Kalisa of 12 Nathan Pratt Drive, Unit 4, to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission for a term to expire May 31st, 2027, and Edward Bernard of 42 Elsinore Street to the Concord Cultural Council for a term to expire May 31, 2027.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Very good.
Great.
Town managers report.
So I am going to be very quick. I actually wasn't sure how much time you might have on the agenda tonight for that. So I did distribute a written report, and you should have that. I wanted to mention that we have started hearing about a project over at Walden Pond. So there is a project, it's entitled Universal Access Improvements. So there's work being done by the state, or work being proposed by the state over there for some improvements. Part of the work will require taking down a significant number of trees. This project has been reviewed, and I think even a couple of years ago, by our Natural Resources Commission. It has an order of conditions on the project. But I just wanted to let you know, because we are starting to hear from people now that this is moving, so there is some information in the report on that project.
Great, thank you.
Also in the report, there's a lot of good information about work being done at CMLP. And I know often there may be questions about the work that they're doing, and we refer people to the Light Board that meets at least monthly. That's where any of the work that CMLP is undertaking is discussed in detail. But there's some good information on the project, including an update on the battery storage project, and a note that we are looking for a Light Board member. And this is a committee that we often have a number of volunteer interest cards, and to the best of my knowledge, we don't yet have any. So I know I have done some outreach. I think some other people have done some outreach. Interestingly enough, because the chair of PWC is here, we have lots of people who want to be on Public Works Commission. I probably have 6 or 7 cards, and we have no vacancies on the Public Works Commission, and not likely to have any for a good term. So we are trying to see if some of those people might be interested in the Light Board. But definitely, if anybody's listening and they're interested in the Light Board, please let us know. So those were just the couple of things that I wanted to mention. And again, I wasn't sure if we were going to run over, so I didn't prepare a whole lot for this evening.
I'm really excited to see here the Complete Streets grant. Thank you to everyone who worked on that. That is wonderful.
Good. Okay, chair's remarks. I'll be quick, too. I want to mention some of the upcoming roundtables that we have. The Sustainability Roundtable will be December 11th. The Housing Roundtable will be December 10th. And we are having some training on First Amendment. And the reason this comes up is because the Select Board wrote a correspondence policy, and we had really good intentions of trying to keep the correspondence that we publish, trying to keep civility within the community and within our public discourse. And in the course of doing that, we found out that we might have run afoul of people's First Amendment rights. So I decided that maybe we needed some training. And I think all boards and committees need some training. I think we're all we're all well-intentioned because we want civility, and yet we also have to be aware that we have a First Amendment right that we should be aware of. So we're having training in-house here on December 3rd. I invite all boards and committees to attend. It's at 3 o'clock. It's also a hybrid meeting. So this, I think, is something that I hope is well attended. I'm really looking forward to it because I want to take this. I take this seriously, and I want to do it right. We're also at our next meeting on December 2nd. We're going to finalize our flag policy. I want to thank the community for being patient because we have a moratorium, but we will present and decide on our flag policy on December 2nd. And then the other thing I want to mention is that what's happening now within town staff, which I think is just a wonderful thing, is the goals of town staff are now starting to align under the goals of the select board and the town manager. So we spent time at the beginning of the year developing goals. We put our goals out there. The town manager developed her goals. They integrated with each other, and now we are in the process of having those trickle down within the organization so that the organization is aligned underneath the select board and the town manager. So I'm very pleased with that. We'll be talking more about that at our next meeting. And I also think that this is something that would be a good reminder for committees that when they're putting their goals together, to think of, are their goals something that is given to them from statute, or are their goals something that were given to them because they were appointed by the select board? And how do they align with the select board goals? So with that, I'll move on to the next agenda item, which is, I forget what it is.
Liaison.
Oh, liaison reports. So I asked the committee, the board, to provide written liaison reports. This is something we borrowed from the Finance Committee, and I want to get feedback. Do people feel like that's okay? Is that working?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we have such a jammed agenda, yes. I mean, it'd be nice sometimes to get the verbal discussions, but I think more often
we can
than
always
not.
ask questions of each other. And
Yeah.
in fact,
I like it, though.
I do have a question. So what I was thinking of, we could do written liaison reports and then come with questions for each other if we have questions.
Yep.
And I do have a question for you, Mark, about the middle school building committee.
Okay.
The other thing, before we leave that, the other thing is next meeting, we will be getting an update from Andrea as far as what she heard from boards, chairs around the liaison role, what our role is. And I also want to emphasize that the purpose of the liaison reports is for us to report back to the select board what we heard in open meeting. And also, so it's not a way of bringing in information into discussion that wasn't on the agenda that I put together or the agenda that your board put together. To do that would be a violation of open meeting law. So the purpose of the liaison reports are, again, to bring back to the select board and to the community what you heard in an open meeting.
And
Okay.
Mary, just to point out, those liaison reports, I mean, I only call out the stuff that I think is important for this board to know.
Right.
I could say a lot more than I did, but we're just trying to
No,
be
that's-
brief and to the
that's
point,
right.
and it's relevant to this board.
Exactly,
So, yep.
exactly,
Right, yep.
exactly.
So I also think that it's necessary in the liaison reports to raise issues that appear like they may be headed towards us for
Yeah,
some reason.
absolutely, same.
So
Correct. Yep.
that's maybe goes a little bit beyond what was
Well,
actually
it's a heads
discussed
up.
by a given board or
Yeah.
committee in open meeting, but if it looks like it's coming in our direction, I think we need to.
Right, like, for example,
Talk
there's
about
one in mine, one of my groups is looking at coming in soon to have us redo their charge. So that's
Right.
something that I wanted to give a heads up on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I raised one which I'm not even quite exactly sure how this got to me, but there may be a request for a tree removal hearing, which apparently,
Yeah.
like nuisance dog hearings, is a rare and special event that we
Yes.
get to
Yes.
address from time to time.
No, we know about that,
Yeah.
so. But anyway, I do have a question for you, Mark, on your liaison
Yes.
report for the middle school. So what's
Yes.
happening with the lockers?
So the decision was made to let the lockers go forward as designed and planned. They've been installed, and we're moving on. with the school as designed.
Okay, okay. And I have a question for you, Terry. The 2229
No, I mean,
Main.
they're all are.
I'm gonna ask my household to mute themselves.
Before you get to that, Mark, I didn't quite understand. So the lockers what do you mean?
So just backing up a little bit.
Yeah.
It was, as the lockers, so in the new middle school, the plan was only to have lockers for 6th grade. We know the middle school is
Right.
6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And it was thought that that would allow the smaller
Right.
children to store their backpacks and only carry some of their
Right.
stuff. Those lockers were custom designed and made. It turned out that they were 12 inches by
Right, they're too
15.
small.
They were too small
Right.
for a backpack, but they were also, so there was a brief look at whether or not there was a way to recover from that with something that would be appropriate for a backpack. It turned out that the costs were going to be prohibitive.
Okay.
And
That's what I didn't understand.
given that there's less than 12 weeks to
Right.
opening the middle school, which is kind of an amazing fact
Isn't that
in
amazing?
and of itself.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And the lead time for even prefab lockers was
Okay.
more than that.
All right.
The decision was to go ahead with these, which would be certainly adequate for storing some of the books and
Okay,
lightening the
I
load.
get it. Thanks.
But
yeah.
they're not going to be changed.
Great.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Oh,
Yeah, I had a
yeah,
question.
right.
So the 2229 Main, we've got they're going to have the report for us, right?
Right.
And you said a public forum? Did I read that right?
Right. I think we had been talking about then either the select board, I guess the select board maybe, because the committee will be finished, although
Okay.
most of them will probably show up. Because once the report is out,
Yep.
the public will read it, and now, I think they wanted to get some reaction.
Okay, okay.
And we want to get some reaction.
Okay.
Because the select board is then
Yes.
in charge of the next steps. So where do we go from here? So there would be maybe in January or February, some kind of, half an hour at our meeting or a
Good.
special meeting or
Got
whatever.
it, good. I'll put that on the agenda.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for any other member?
No.
We're good. Okay, let's talk about public seating. Is Mimi here?
She
here.
was.
She left.
She online?
Somebody said she's online.
Mimi, are you online?
There she
There
is.
she
I
is.
know, I saw her over there.
I know.
She's both.
Ears are burning.
Everywhere.
She was in there. She's back.
I want to say, while you're getting prepared, I love this bench style. It's beautiful.
Oh, good. Well, it might look familiar because it's
Yeah,
the
it
same
does.
benches as outside the library.
Yep.
So folks might remember that we received a grant from the Mass Office of Travel and Tourism for their Destination Capital program for infrastructure to support the 250th. So we received $27,000 for benches and been meeting with different, both town staff and committees. We are proposing this particular teak bench. Turns out there's only 2 vendors in Massachusetts that I can find that could obtain them for us before the 250th. So I've identified 27 different sites. Some of the sites need to go through the Historic Districts Commission, some needs to go before the Natural Resources Commission, some turns out is in private property. So the rationale of how I'm looking at citing those benches is the goal is how to get people out of their cars and, like Concord of yore, walking around. And for the folks to come ideally to Thoreau Depot, walk to Concord Center, walk to the North Bridge, walk to the Concord Museum. That's sort of the outermost reaches, and especially hang out in Thoreau Depot and Concord Center. So I looked at 27 particular spots. You can see this is the bench that we're looking to get. And we'll have a plaque honoring the 250th, a little brass, a standard brass plaque, and I'm working with the 250th committee on the specific artwork for that. One of the challenges for siting these benches is we want it to be right next to the sidewalk, so that the idea is for people to walk around and be like, oh, there's a bench, I will sit right there. There's very limited public space next to the sidewalks along those areas that doesn't otherwise have a slope, isn't otherwise needed for a storm, for a snow storage, that is safe enough that it's not in the line of traffic. There's been a number of different considerations. So I'm proposing 27 different ones with really only funding for about 15 of them, knowing that a bunch of them are going to fall by the wayside. Because a couple of those benches will be on private property, I worked with the town council and other town staff to create a simple easement document for those property owners to agree to let the town anchor the benches there, with the understanding that if for some reason they become damaged or need maintenance, that we'll just remove them. And we're doing a pretty simple way of anchoring them, just a little L-shaped bracket if it's on hardscape, or a sub-ground anchor, basically something way deep underneath with a little cable, just to keep the bench from walking away and still allow it to be moved for cleaning maintaining the grass underneath. So I don't know if we want to go through all the different sites.
Sorry, just maybe a naive question. So we're putting in the benches for the 250th. Are they going to stay forever?
So they are wooden benches, so forever is going to be relative.
No, but the point is not to just put them in and then take them out.
Right, the hope is for them to be able to stay for 3 years, pending if they are still in good condition. If they're still in good condition, maybe stay longer. If they need repair, we'll take them out. So they're kind of semi-permanent. But I found that there's several locations where you could see that the streetscape was built to accommodate a bench that never got a bench. So next to the antique market there off of Walden that goes the cut through to the parking lot, there's 2 spaces that looks like there was intended for a bench. Similarly, on Kai's Road next to Minuteman, the Middlesex Bank, there's another spot that looks like it was meant for a bench. So we're looking to provide them there.
Are any of these benches replacing other benches? Or I saw like the Chamberlain Park, it looked like there's already a granite bench of some kind there. It's just next to that.
So that's one of the things I'm working through with the Historic Districts Commission.
Yeah.
These benches are meant to be age-friendly and actually function as benches.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of these granite blocks that are meant to provide seating, but it's very rare that somebody actually uses them as seating. And it's not really able to accommodate people with any kind of mobility issue, and they're not comfortable. So I'm going to be working with them of like, unfortunately, because we have very limited spaces to put them, we're having to do some of those not ideal spots that are next to the granite blocks.
Okay. But for the time being, the idea is adding capacity and then, okay.
Yeah.
So are we, sorry, there's other benches that are going on. I just want to make sure, like, are we coordinated with the other benches that are maybe going in?
I don't know of any other benches. The other question people have asked me is about the 200th anniversary benches, those big granite ones that have kind of sunken in the ground. That's how this whole process started, because I sort of looked at like, well, how can we fix those benches? And I wasn't able to secure funding or to find a way to execute that project in a timely way. And it also wasn't meeting the age-friendly effort.
I just want to make sure we're coordinated, because I guess in talking with the Historic District, right, they're saying the Permanent Memorial Committee received a grant to increase the number of benches in town, and then they were also interested in getting the existing ones kind of fixed up.
They're talking about the same benches.
They're talking about the same benches? Okay, all right, that's what I wanted to try to confirm, or say, is it a different? Okay.
Same ones. The 250th is
So it's
counting
all
this
the
as one of
same
their projects.
group? Okay, thank you.
So, Mimi, you mentioned some of these still have to get approval from the Historic District Commission and NRC.
Yeah, so Historic District approved the style of them,
Yep.
and some of them, they were okay. I'm going to be scheduling a site visit with 2 of the members are going to come with me, and we're going to work out some of the details.
Great.
And we need to sign this agreement for each bench? Or is this a blanket agreement?
It's my understanding the select board needs to approve because it's going to be in the public right-of-way.
Right.
So right now, the speed I'm going, it looks like the benches aren't going to get in until March or April.
Okay.
So if you wanted to postpone this, that would be fine until I actually know for sure which ones we're going to have.
If you want to do all 27 now and anticipate that only 15 of them are going to actually come to fruition.
So we wouldn't actually sign the agreement until you had the approval from the other committees, and we could put that on the consent agenda if we agree that in principle we like this idea.
I think that's a great
Yeah.
approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, what do people think?
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we're not going to vote, right? We'll vote when it's on the consent agenda, but I think you could take it back to the HDC and to the NRC that it has the select board's approval,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, full support.
Thank you for working on this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the details, too, and answering those questions.
You probably know more about benches than you want.
No, I was kind of curious, like, why are you putting a bench next to the other bench? But so you answered that question.
So why are none in West Concord? Because it's the 250th, or?
Yeah, because this was specifically to get visitors to the main sites.
Got it, okay.
I am working with the deputy town manager because there's been some requests for other benches in West
Okay.
Concord.
That's great.
Some folks who are wanting to donate, but I'm sort of wanting to get this one done before I go to the next set.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you,
Thank
Mimi.
you.
Okay, what's next? Food trucks.
Food trucks.
And
Food
tree
trucks.
lighting.
Hi,
Now we're
good
having
evening.
fun.
Jessica Porter, Assistant Town Manager. We're looking for approval this evening to have a total of 4 food trucks at the annual tree lighting event, which is on Sunday, December 1st, from 3 to 6 p.m. The plan is to have 2 food trucks, 1 food truck that will be for coffee, and then the last truck will be sweet treats. 2 of the trucks that are designated to be brought on board that day are already permitted with the town. 1 of them is working on getting re-permitted, and then the 4th truck, we are just waiting on confirmation of the permit, which we expect to get. So we would love your approval so we can have these trucks at that event this year.
So on this image, it was clear to me that 2 of the food trucks would be on Monument Square. Where are the other 2?
That I actually don't know. I'm sorry. I'm pinch hitting for our recreation director this evening.
Sorry, in past years, how many have we had 4 in past years, or is this something different?
This is actually only my 2nd year here with the tree lighting, and last year it was weather cancellations, so I actually don't have the answer to that question of how many we've had in the past.
Did we have any?
No, we didn't.
Megan,
Hello, Megan Smudo, Deputy Town Manager. We have had, I believe, 3, but this is a fairly new ordinance to allow food trucks, so there haven't been too many opportunities to utilize it in this fashion. So I think that the times that we've had more than 3 or more have been for town-sponsored events. I believe there were a request for 3 food trucks for the Pride Festival in June for the downtown program.
they were also Juneteenth, I thought, at the Robbins House. We had some
Oh,
there.
yeah, we did.
Yeah, so we've done it before. Good.
Right, but my recollection is that we have some sort of designated spots in the
Yeah.
Kais
There
Road
is,
parking
yeah.
lot where we,
the buses
sort
are.
of automatically have food trucks, and recognizing that this is, over by the flagpole. I just was wondering where the other 2 were. And I'll renew my hope that, some of these food trucks can run off of batteries or be plugged in somehow so that we don't have gas or diesel generators sort of, creating noise and smell
Yep.
and emissions.
I'll certainly pass that feedback along and see what can be done on that front.
Yeah, I mean, because again, it's not like, it sounds like, hey, food trucks, that's awesome, like, let's just go do it. It's just, if you have 4 clogging up traffic and spewing fumes in the middle of the ceremony, it's sort of like, oh, wait a second, why did we do that? So I just want to make sure that there's like a real plan for.
Yeah. I mean, if they're up at Kais Road or something like that, then they're not interrupting Silent Night or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. But you want them to be accessible.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So
Yeah, it's a
that's right.
balance,
Yep.
really.
Right.
So I guess take that feedback.
Not
and see what you
opposed in
can- see what
principle,
you can
but
do with it.
Transparent.
Yeah.
So are we inclined to
To support it, yeah.
I have one more question. What time is the tree lighting on December 1st, which we should be advertising?
I believe it's 3 to 6.
It is 3 to 6, that's what the...
3 to 6. Thank you. I didn't see it on our, great.
Do the vendors in town support food trucks? I mean, does it take away from their business at all?
It's my understanding that most of the establishments are actually closing down for the event, which
Okay.
is in part why we need the 4 food trucks.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
It's a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. So we need a vote.
Okay. Move to approve the recreation request authorizing for more than 2 food trucks at the town tree lighting on December 1st.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, pilot. Let's look at the pilot again.
There was just one small change to this, right?
Well, that was
I
my
think
question.
I saw it in here, so I just wanted to just
Anthony,
check.
what are the changes from last time?
There were 2 changes. One was, if you remember that little chart that was in the middle, so I eliminated that, the select board's request. And then, after the reference to police, fire, and public works, I added Terry and other municipal services.
your suggestion.
Yep.
Those were the only 2 requests that
Right.
were made for changes.
So, Anthony, where it says you took out the table,
Yes.
okay, then you should take out the sentence that says the following table is a breakdown.
Oh, yeah.
In the second paragraph, the third paragraph, actually.
Last sentence
It
of
says
the,
the following table is a breakdown of non-taxable land in Concord.
Good catch.
Should probably take that out.
yeah, okay.
Yes.
The other thing is, I've got little typo things here. Wherever it says non-taxable, shouldn't that say tax exempt? Because it is in fact, it might be a net, but
I don't have a copy. What's the reference?
it says, look, for example, the first sentence says, payments in lieu of taxes help local governments offset losses, and property taxes due to the existence of non-taxable state, federal, and other nonprofit entities. And I just wonder, it should be, they're tax exempt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Because we're trying to tax them,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, instead of non-taxable, it should be tax exempt.
Yeah, I think that's, because there's other places where it does say tax exempt, so
Yeah.
we should be
Exactly.
consistent.
So wherever it says non-taxable, we should switch that to tax exempt. Take out that last sentence in the third paragraph. The first paragraph where it says due to the existent, it should be existence. And other than that, I think it's good.
I had, Anthony, I had one sort of wordsmith comment and then one question. So on the second page, as you're describing the policy, point number 2,
Yep.
in the middle there, it kind of says towns, police, fire, public works, operations, and other town services depending nonprofit entity. I think it should say depending on
Yes.
the nonprofit entity, so just so that's clarified there, that language.
Yeah, that's good.
And then my question was, and maybe I just didn't pick up on this in the last one, it talks about a contractual term. So how long would that be? And since it's a voluntary program, is it really a contract you could enforce? If somebody just said, hey, thanks, but I don't want to do it next year? So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, so it is a contract that's established depending on what we're negotiating. And yes, it is enforceable. Once they sign a contract, then we could add that to the tax rolls and add that to the assessment database, so the tax bill would be spit out.
Okay. And when we say a term, like, is your experience is, how long are they signing up for? Are these things we're going to have to renew every 3 years, or?
No, it would stay with the property. It all depends on what, some negotiations ramp up over a longer period of time than others. Other organizations are willing to just start paying the 25% right off the bat. So it varies depending on maybe how successful the nonprofit organization is and what their donations come in at.
I think we were talking about 10 or 20-year terms,
Yeah, it's
right?
just
We're
sort of
not,
like what's
not
typical. I was just curious if-
3 or 5-year
No.
terms,
Yeah,
because
okay.
we want to be able to know this is a source of revenue and to
Put
be
it in
able
the
to
plans,
rely
that's,
upon that.
yeah, okay.
Any other comments, changes? Andrea, you got all those, right? Great, thank you. So, are we ready to approve this?
Yep.
Guess we're ready for a motion. Move to approve the pilot policy draft as updated in our discussion.
Do I have a
Second. Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you, Anthony.
It's 9:01.
9:01.
All
We're
right.
good.
Wow,
Okay,
wonderful.
move to adjourn?
We're early.
Do I have moved?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good.